3rd, 2015 is called to order. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone present and to our television viewers. While our study sessions are generally limited to receipt of information from staff and discussion of that information and review of resolutions prior to a vote, at times we conduct votes during study sessions, and any item that will be voted on this evening has been posted as required by state law. So the meeting is being televised live and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the board website for replay times. The meeting is also being streamed live on our PPS TV Services website. Director Morton is ill and absent this evening. So at this time, we'll go ahead and have public comment. Do we have anyone signed up? Great. So why don't you go ahead and read the first couple names, and I'll read the instructions for testimony.
Marcy Ownby and Tanya Schaefer.
Thanks so much for being here tonight, taking the time to come out and provide your comments. We value your input and look forward to hearing your thoughts, reflections, and concerns. Are those folks out there? Oh, come on up. Sorry. Go ahead and have a seat. I'm just reading through our standard instructions before testimony. So we'll be actively listening and reflecting, but not responding to any comments or questions during public comment, but Board Member Roseanne Powell is out in the audience if you want to check in with her afterward for any information. Complaints about individual employees should be directed to the Superintendent's Office as a personnel matter and won't be heard in this forum. So you have a total of 3 minutes to share your comments. Please begin by stating your name for the record and spelling your last name. During the first 2 minutes, a green light is on, and then when you have 1 minute remaining, a yellow light will go on, and then when the red light comes on after 3 minutes, we respectfully ask that you wrap up your comments. So thanks again for taking the time to be here. Welcome.
Is it
Go
a go?
ahead.
Hi, I'm Marcy Ownby, and that's O-W-N-B-Y. I'm a mother to 5 PPS students in kindergarten through 7th grade. My children attend our neighborhood school as well as Access Academy. They're all generally happy to go to school, and this was not always the case. I want to speak today about the need for improvement in tag services in PPS. I am aware of the district policy that each classroom teacher should differentiate in the classroom to provide tag services. So just using 2 of my children who are currently Access students now as examples for what this looked like, I want to draw a little picture for you of what these services look like. But first I want to tell you, Bella is one of the girls I'll be talking about, one of the children. She's a perfect fit for school, eager to learn, but limited in what she can learn in class because the busy teacher is simply grateful not to worry about her. Benjamin was not a perfect fit for school. He inspired me to read books like The Dyslexic Advantage, A Mind at a Time, and Square Peg. So at conferences, my daughter Bella, we heard lovely things like, she exceeds expectations, she's a joy to have in class, insightful, kind, helpful, pleasure to teach. Her 1st grade teacher allowed her to go to the art station and draw when her work was finished, and she often came home with 20 to 30 new pictures a day. The following year, she was asked to tutor other students or read quietly when she finished her work. She read a lot of books. While she was eager to learn, she was not eager to go to school. Benjamin, in spite of being curious young scientist and a backyard bridge engineer, by 4th grade had a painful history of struggling to fit in school, both academically and socially. In 4th grade, his teacher called him, said he was lazy, and I took him for academic testing and learned that he was both extremely gifted and in need of special education for dyslexia and dysgraphia. My son's frustration with school, his depression and tearful exclamations such as, "I hate school," or "I'm the dumbest kid in my class," began to make sense. Our neighborhood school did its best to accommodate his needs with special ed help, while his giftedness simply could not be addressed in the classroom. The teacher did offer challenge homework, which the first and only week it came home included a large word find and a 574-point dot-to-dot, neither of which was appropriate or interesting to my son. Thanks to our desperation for help for Benjamin, our family found a link to Access online. We applied Benjamin 2 years in a row and were waitlisted both times. We're grateful that today he has been accepted in Access Academy as well as his younger sister. This is the only functional program that PPS has for gifted students. Transferring Benjamin to Access made a world of difference for him. His depression has lifted, he is eager to go to school, he has made friends, he is engaged in his classes. And my daughter, while she readily admits that she doesn't like her homework taking more than 20 minutes now a week, school is a better fit for her. I want to encourage the district to prioritize and expand the access program. It should be available to all who qualify and ask for it, as well as taking action to implement TAG-ACT's well-researched suggestions to improve each neighborhood school's access to differentiated education.
Great, thank you.
Tanya Schaefer, Schaefer. I'm the parent of a second grader at Llewellyn Elementary, and I'm here to tell you about our family's experiences with TAG services. My son accompanied me today, and he fervently believes that if he can speak with you personally, Superintendent Smith, you will help him and his peers. As he told me, kids have power. His enthusiasm and optimism are why I'm here tonight, so I will start by reading his words. As a TAG student, I don't feel like I'm challenged enough by Bridges assignments and other math worksheets. It would be great if you could spend more money on TAG than you are now. I would like to learn things I don't know as well, such as division and square roots. We have had a lot of kids join the Harder Math group, which is a group that advocates for harder math and math acceleration. If we get harder math, we will learn more and know more when we are 29. Please listen to us! ! In our family's experience, the district is failing to adequately serve TAG-identified children, especially at the elementary school level. Differentiated instruction is a laudable goal, but it cannot work without systemic instructional and curricular support for teachers. For example, the district's policy to serve all TAG students in the classroom is entirely teacher-dependent. The decentralization of responsibility for developing curriculum extensions to each individual teacher guarantees that the resulting education of TAG students will be wildly uneven in a single school, let alone across the district. Large class sizes prevent teachers from realistically being able to address the rate and level of learning of all students. With 31 students in my son's first grade class last year, he only received different math homework, not different math instruction during the day. Especially in math, the district's policy is not working for my son nor many other students at Llewellyn. Whereas parent help in reading is encouraged and requested, and writing conferences are done individually with students, this model is not followed in math, which leaves students who are ready for new material above grade level spending weeks on topics they have already mastered. Who among us likes to go to meetings or trainings when we already know the material being presented? It's not very motivating, is it? The district's purported options for students who need curriculum extension beyond what individual teachers are able to provide, single subject acceleration, is shrouded in secrecy. Neither the current policy nor process is available on the TAG website. It took our principal and I 3 weeks to obtain an acceleration form from the TAG office. The TAG office would not tell me what the process was. Even when I told them, the principal asked me to call them. Now that we have the form, we still aren't clear on the process or standards used by the TAG office to test and evaluate our son. I could provide many more examples if time permitted, but for now, I ask that you take seriously the needs of this group of children, provide curriculum extensions to all teachers in every grade level across the district, improve the culture of the TAG office so it is a true resource for schools and families rather than a roadblock, truly teach to each child's rate and level. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Our next two speakers, Marisol Cruiser and Aubrey Pagenstecker.
Welcome.
Buenas noches. I'm Marisol Kreutzer, K-R-E-U, C as in zebra, E-R, teacher on special assignment for dual language programs. I believe Portland Public School efforts are to create a cultural transformation that will care and successfully educate students of color that we are currently failing. My heart shrinks to the size of a pebble when I see that only 47% of Native Americans, 56% Latinos, and 60% African American students graduate from high school. I'm here to advocate for additional care, collaborative action research for equity funding. This KRPD supports teachers in the recognition of individual students' needs and their learning on how to not be colorblind, while at the same time feeling safe in their discussions on race. When teachers recognize a student's race as part of who they are, it helps them analyze their teaching methods and what a student needs beyond the curriculum and standardized tests. In a previous board meeting, it was my interpretation that a couple of you were demanding district-wide CARE-PD for all teachers. I must ask, is demanding care for all realistic? I don't think so. It will take away from the value that collaborative action and research have on teachers' personal practices. The urgency is closing the achievement gap should not be rushed. It should be funded, supported, and intentionally spread in all of the schools and in our system. The rush should be reflected on our budget priorities. Care work should be part of DLI, math, ELA, school improvement specialists, mentors, ESL, SPED, all TOSAs, and all teachers working with teachers. In order to transform the society and the system, we need to intentionally provide care while strengthening the practice of individual teachers. The district is turning into a more reflective practice for educators. CARE-PD needs to run its course. It means I meet you where you are and I will support you to change the students of color's outcomes. There is a need for care across departments to support us closing the racial achievement gap. I share the resilience and commitment PPS has to the cultural transformation as stated on PPS framework. It is my goal. Every student succeeds regardless of race or class. At the present time, I feel that our system is not supporting teachers or TOSAs who want to align with CARE. CARE-PD should not be demanded, but it should be available for everyone. Train all trainers so all of us support this work. Please continue prioritizing our equity work to close the racial achievement gap. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Aubrey Peggenstecker. I teach kindergarten at Woodlawn Pre-K 8. I'm here to speak on behalf of kindergarten teachers across PPS who are struggling to ensure the safety of their students and the quality of their learning environments. I'm also here to give a voice to students across our district, both in general and special education, who are struggling to learn in school environments that are not equipped to meet their needs. I'm a gen ed teacher, but this was the first time in 10 years that it was necessary for me to learn how to safely restrain a student should he or she become a danger to themselves or others, a situation I've experienced firsthand on a number of occasions. This is training that was traditionally reserved for educators working in our district's most restrictive environments, but has now become so commonplace that trainings are often full. Educators across this district have been pleading for help for months on behalf of their students with little or no result. They continue to work in unsafe conditions where they regularly are battered by students who are inappropriately placed or who are not receiving sufficient supports. Our students throw classroom materials, toss chairs, throw trash cans, and flip tables. It's not only the safety of educators that is of concern, however, but of our students as well, of course. Peers in kinder classrooms are routinely screamed at, spit on, scratched, shoved, kicked, and punched by their classmates. Scissors are being used in our classrooms as weapons and brought out only under strict supervision rather than being made accessible as a tool for creativity and fine motor development. Pencils are used as weapons that students use to stab one another rather than as tools for writing and drawing. The students that I'm describing are not having their social, emotional, mental health, or academic needs adequately addressed. Many of them are demonstrating little to no growth, academic or otherwise, in their general education placements. And as an educator, it's heartbreaking to see the expectations for our students lowered because even simple requests lead to severe blowouts that myself and my colleagues are not capable or prepared to respond to. A number of students have run from our buildings, and yet we are advised not to put our hands on children. This creates a lose-lose situation for educators whose primary objective is to ensure safety. It feels like we're putting our students and ourselves in jeopardy, regardless of how we respond. In the situations that I've described, these are not just a handful of isolated incidents, but rather a growing trend in kindergarten classrooms across PPS. Schools don't know how to operate within the new special education framework because it was not rolled out properly, and no one at school sites seems to understand the process to obtain necessary student supports. The messages we're hearing are keep the students in your room and use the people you have in your building. But in many cases, the building teams do not have the capacity to provide the necessary accommodations and supports as outlined in individual student plans. Learning center teachers are stretched too thin by large caseloads with high numbers of students with severe needs. School staff of every stripe are regularly pulled from their work to respond to students in crisis, diminishing the overall health and vitality and effectiveness of the school. In order for a redesign of our SPED program to be successful, school staff must be provided with necessary training and clear processes for supporting all students. Educator voice and experience must be at the forefront of that work. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Our final speaker is Maria McClay.
Welcome.
Hi. My name is Maria McClay, and I am a special education teacher at Pioneer Special Program. A placement at Pioneer is considered a restrictive placement because we do not serve typically developing students, and we are not a neighborhood school. We serve students on IEPs, or individual education plans, who have behaviors severe enough to impede their own progress or the progress of others in a neighborhood school setting. We also serve as a temporary placement for students who need to be stabilized or have their placement evaluated. Since the district got rid of the option of behavior classrooms for students with special education services, there are more students coming into us than we have the capacity to teach. In the past, we would receive students throughout the year, and students who had met their safety goals at Pioneer would move back to neighborhood schools throughout the year as well, keeping some sort of balance. This year, we received so many students at once that we quickly reached capacity, and now we hear that there are many other students who need our services, but we don't have room for them. This also means that we're building classes with a group of students who may be new to school, if they're in kindergarten, or have many, many unsafe behaviors that need to be smoothed out before we have a positive classroom environment to bring other students into. This can be difficult with a lot of students at once. When we have a placement meeting for our evaluation and stabilization students to determine whether they should stay at Pioneer as their permanent placement, we are being told there is nowhere else for them to go except general education. So of course they end up staying at Pioneer because they need services. They need individualized support and the structure a small classroom can provide. These are the students that would have gone to behavior rooms in the past, and when they stay with us, we don't have the capacity to take on other, more needy students who are waiting for services. The behavior coaches at Pioneer also provide the nonviolent crisis intervention training, which is crucial when dealing with students with unsafe behaviors. All trainings have been at capacity, and yet there are many teachers in general education who haven't been able to get into a training despite the fact that they have students with unsafe behaviors in their classrooms engaging in those behaviors. As special educators, we have a lot of knowledge about the students we teach and about best practices for serving them safely in the least restrictive environment possible. We must have a decisive voice in the structuring or restructuring of placements and programs that serve our students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Thank you all for coming tonight. Really appreciate hearing your input. So comments from the Portland Association of Teachers are next. Our contract with the PAT allows some time when requested on our agenda for brief comments. So we're welcoming down Suzanne Cohen, who's Vice President of PAT, to the table. Hi, Suzanne.
Hello. Good evening. I'd like to talk about two things, the testimony that you've heard from two PAT teachers about SPED services in PPS right now, and then about the SBAC resolution. I want to start by saying that we fully support a more inclusive model. I taught in a communication behavior classroom for 2 years and fought hard for inclusion. And in my medium-length career of 12 years, we have tried twice before and not succeeded in moving towards a more inclusive model. And so because we want it to succeed, and I believe that you want it to succeed too, I'm going to ask you to do a review of how this rollout is happening so that we can resolve some of the unsafe situations and the lack of teacher-led support so that we can really move towards a more inclusive model. Unsafe situations, like Aubrey described, are numerous. We actually wanted more kindergarten teachers to come speak to you, but the slots were filled. We have tried to work with Special Education Director Mary Pearson and have her address these situations immediately, but they have been very slow or nothing has been resolved. these situations are not safe for anybody, and they need immediate attention. There's a trifecta of change, some initiated by PPS and some by the state, that is kind of leading to this storm. So one is the reduction in exclusionary discipline. And again, that is something that we fully support and would like to be partners in and have it be teacher-led with proper support. And I think Marisol spoke to that and the outcry that we are having for how can we do this right. The second thing that has happened is a change in state law around the restraint policy. And then the third is the special education redesign. So for the restraint policy, PAT knew about this summer. This was a law by the state. We could have been partners in fighting against this law or changing it to make it better, but we repeatedly asked in every forum to let's talk about how are we going to do this within PPS. We asked over and over again for what the training plan was, how would we inform members, and now so it got rolled out without our input, and now the classes for restraint are often full. And so people need them. Luckily, Aubrey was able to do it. Teachers are at risk, like Aubrey perfectly described. Your choice is restrain the student and put your own licensure at risk, or let them run. And we're talking about 5-year-olds running out into the street. So because we really want to see this work, and we want it to work right, we need to have a long-term plan that addresses these unsafe situations immediately, because that cannot go on for the rest of this year. And then a long-term plan for how we can actually do inclusion and have the students, both gen ed and special ed, and all our teachers, both gen ed and special ed, feel successful about a change we'd like to see, but not with these unsafe conditions. When I spoke about the budget surplus, I did mention that we are trying to enact a new thing, a special ed redesign. And in the process of change, perhaps funds are necessary in terms of more support and more training. And yet, no funds were allocated, and special education does not have a set aside to provide supports in these unsafe conditions. And the workload committee has been stepping in to offer support. So again, what I'm asking is that you conduct your own independent review of these situations and work immediately to promptly correct these most unsafe situations. The next thing I want to talk about is the SBAC, the Smarter Balance Assessment Resolution. Last year, you took some bold steps and were leaders in the state, and to really fight for what our students deserve and what quality assessment should look like. We have a collaborative team with PAT and PPS, our assessment committee, that also is working with the state to really find a better way for Oregon and a better form of assessment. So I appreciate all your work on that. And I realize that this is a draft and you'll have more time to work on it. I know that our president, Gwen Sullivan, reached out and we talked about some things that are missing from this resolution that were in the first, including making sure that we don't give a test that isn't free from culturally or linguistic or socioeconomic biases. So there's a couple of things here, though, that concern me, and one is that we're advocating that the state at this point give enough resources to fund the Smarter Balance Assessment. But before we advocate for that, I have brought enough for everyone. I want to promote this event that's happening next Saturday, a symposium on a better path, because before we decide that we want to properly fund this assessment, maybe we actually want to find an assessment that's right for students. There's also a piece about holding off on using it to evaluate teachers, but this test was never meant to evaluate teachers. So let's be strong, bold leaders like you were last year and really talk about what is the right forms of summative assessment and what are their purposes and what are they intended. And if you're not familiar with Rick Stiggins and the work that our own district is doing around assessment, I encourage you, because I think if we could align this more to that work, it would be great. And so the other part that concerns me is, I guess, letter N, where we talk about a more challenging test will not harm our students as long as we convey to the students that it's a learning opportunity rather than a punitive or a demeaning experience. And again, I just want to go back to Rick Stiggins, and there's just so much research out there that when you give students a test where they're designed to fail, there's no way that it won't have damaging effects on their self-esteem or their sense of self-efficacy. And if you think of any of the goals that you have tried to accomplish, weight loss, fitness goals, personal achievement goals, feeling successful breeds more success. And I am very concerned that the idea to mitigate the damaging effects of this test would lie on adults to be like, oh, don't worry about the fact that you've just been labeled a failure. So I appreciate all the work you're doing with this, but I encourage you to come to the symposium, read Rick Stiggins' book, work with the assessment team, and have this resolution be more in alignment with the work that we're doing. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you very much.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. We're good. We'll be
Is it an ODE directive or is it a state law, the new restraint stuff?
You know, let's hold that off until we get to the, casting this down.
Until we get to where?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about this later this evening, so let's go back to.
We're going to talk about the special ed, that's what I'm referring to.
Oh, we're not going to be talking about that tonight.
Okay, how about if we just get a quick clarification from the superintendent?
We'll ask Roseanne, it's on my list of things that I'm going to ask her to follow up on from tonight's testimony. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our
We won't
update
get a
on the
quick
arts,
clarification.
which is, we'll be following up with staff, thank you. So we are excited to receive an update on Portland Public Schools arts education for this year. Superintendent Smith, would you like to introduce this item?
I would, and I'm going to introduce Melissa Goff, who's our Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, and Kristen Brayson, who is our Arts TOSA, and Marna Stalkoff from Right Brain Initiative, who are going to talk. This is our second year of implementation of the dollars that we've received from the arts tax. And so this is really an update on what's happening in PPS, and it's really exciting. So welcome to all three of you.
Thank you. Gotta get our slide up.
I'm not sure. Ah, there. Screen's up.
Good evening.
Yeah. So, good evening, board chairs and Superintendent Smith and Board of Directors. We are very pleased to be able to share with you tonight the progress that we've been able to make in less than a year of Kristen Brayson being in her role as the Arts TOSA and our distinct investment in arts resources as a district, which is such a wonderful place for us to be in, which we haven't had the opportunity to be in recent years. So I'd like to introduce Kristen Brayson, who's the teacher on special assignment, and Marna Stalkup, who partners with us from the Regional Arts and Culture Council and through the Right Brain Initiative.
Good evening, Superintendent Smith and directors. My name is Kristen Brayson, and I began my work as PPS Arts TOSA in May of 2014. Last week you heard from Superintendent Smith about a district-wide arts event. For the first time in the history of the district, we were able to host a large celebration at the Newmark Theater called the Heart of Portland, a PPS K-12 art showcase that highlighted elementary, middle, high school, visual art, dance, music, and theater. To express gratitude to the Portland taxpayers of the city arts tax, the show's goal was to build a strong, visible, cohesive presence for the district's arts education programs. As a platform, the performance was an avenue to educate and galvanize our city's students, parents, teachers, administrators, and community members. As a highlight of that evening, we would like an opportunity to bring a small slice of that joy to you tonight.
Come home, won't you, little baby? 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 Come won't you come home, little baby? Won't you come home, little baby? I won't go all night long. Won't you, little baby? I'll do the cooking, honey. I'll pay the rent. Little baby, I know I've done it all. Won't you, little baby, come? Remember that rainy evening I threw you out with nothing but a fine tooth comb. Won't you, little baby? You know I'm too vain. Now ain't that a shame? Little baby, won't you please come home? Won't you, little baby? Won't you come home? Won't you come home, little baby? Please come home. Come home. Won't you come home, little baby? Won't you come home, little baby? Come home. Won't you come home, please come home, little baby? Little baby, please come home. I'll do the cooking, I'll pay the rent. Little baby, won't you please come home? Please. Won't you come home, little remember that rainy evening? Come home. I threw you out with nothing but Mr. Fine-Tooth Comb, Billy. You're too late, little Billy. Ain't it a crying shame? Little baby, won't you please come home? Won't you, Bill Bailey? Come home. 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 Won't you, Bill Bailey? Nothing but won't you, Bill Bailey? Come home. Won't you, Bill Bailey? You know I do, baby. Now ain't that a shame? Bill Bailey, won't you please come home? Won't you, Bill Bailey? Come home. Won't you, Bill Bailey? Come home. Won't you, Bill Bailey? Bill Bailey, won't you, Mr. Bailey, please come home? Won't you come home, Bill Bailey? Please come home. Oh, please come home, Pop.
Thank you to the Cleveland Dares and music teacher Diana Rowe for their impeccable artistry.
Thank you so much. Oh, we have so many more.
Another song.
Yeah.
We won't be
Thank
singing
you,
for you.
students.
So, in an overview of tonight's presentation, we'll be covering arts integration as a high-leverage strategy to positively impact student success across all content areas. We're going to go over current support of arts education in PPS and our long-term vision of a fully articulated K-12 arts education. We'll also be going over one of our partner stories with Marna so you can see how that works in our schools, and at the end we'll have time for questions. To give you a little background on me, I'm a product of a PPS arts education. As a Jefferson dancer in the late 80s, I was able to benefit from the rich experiences provided by arts specialists, and I have lasting memories that help shape who I am today as Arts TOSA for Portland Public Schools. I looped back to Jefferson as an adult and began my 22-year teaching career as a dance specialist for the district. Through the years, I've had the privilege to teach at Whitaker, Tubman, Ockley Green, Hosford, and Beach. The last 18 years of my teaching career were spent developing and directing the dance department at Da Vinci Arts Middle School, where I grew a dance program from 2 dance classes per day serving 40 students to 12 dance classes per day serving over 300. I'm continually thankful for the public school arts education PPS afforded me, and I'm an example of how the investment comes full circle. Not only did I benefit, but also thousands of musicians, dancers, visual artists, and actors who have immersed themselves as adults in the professional world of art. Kira Brinkley, who you see on the screen, is a remarkable young woman whose passion and determination catapulted her PPS dance training into a professional career. She's an example of the power of our investments. As a part of the Heart of Portland show, Kiara was a featured alumna performer, and this video clip that we're going to show captures a moment of her performance that night and shows her dedication through the beauty of movement. Yes. And Kiera is a part of a documentary about her. There's a documentary that was filmed about her, and woven in that is the experience of Portland Public Schools. Even her going back into the schools, she's done some choreography at Jefferson and Da Vinci, so again, full circle. Today, thanks to the City of Portland Arts Tax, we are receiving an unprecedented amount of exposure and support for arts and arts education in our city. The timing couldn't be better as we challenge ourselves to educate students for the 21st century. Forbes magazine states the top 10 jobs in 2010 didn't exist in 2004. So how do we prepare students for a future we can't see? The arts, by way of arts integration, are a portal to the future. Inherent in its structure, the arts provides a goldmine of underutilized classroom strategies to unlock deeper connections and engagement in student learning. The workforce of the future will rely on students who have been taught to think critically, solve problems creatively, communicate effectively, and collaborate enthusiastically. Through application, art asks students to rehearse, redo, remix, try again, practice, tweak, and then finally perform. As you look at the pictures of last Thursday's Newmark Theater performance, notice the final stages of the student work. They've reached a pinnacle point in their journey. Through learning, feedback, and practice and performance, these students have arrived at a transcendent place where their sense of self is underscored by the confidence in their delivery. How can we superimpose the focus, determination, and drive required to attain this level of performance to other content areas? How will these skills ultimately translate to our district goals of all students reading at grade level by the end of third grade, improved graduation rates, and reduced discipline disparities? Tonight, we will share some opportunities that we've discovered are a catalyst for reaching these goals. As Arts TOSA, I'm charged with 3 key areas of support that focus on arts integration, arts specialist support, and partnership collaborations with our city's major arts organizations. Primary to the district's initiatives, arts integration is a surefire avenue to reach our goal of student success and inclusion. Arts integration as a bridge specifically allows opportunities for students to see themselves in their work by fostering self-efficacy. Math, science, language arts, and social studies through an arts integration lens can now have multiple answers to one problem and action-oriented activities that get students out of their seats and engaged in the learning. Arts integration makes vivid the fact that neither words in their literal form nor numbers can exhaust what we know. The limits of our language do not define the limits of our cognition. Arts integration provides a pathway of access to academic content for every student, no matter where they are in their learning, but especially for our emergent bilinguals, students of color, and those who are traditionally disenfranchised. So what does arts integration look like in an average classroom? Arts specialists use the skills unique to the arts to work with generalist teachers, collaborating on specific units of study to aid students in making deeper connections to the work. For example, a dance specialist might work with a science teacher on teaching the water cycle. Through this, the dance teacher will apply the same principles of performance as in the dance classroom to the science unit, so kids are learning determination, perseverance, grit, and how to turn perceived failures into new ideas and concepts. Over time, students begin to learn that creative thinking can be applied to all learning and that mistakes can be part of the patchwork, often breaking the mold for problem solving. One of our main partners, the Right Brain Initiative, is leading the nation in arts integration. We'll hear about their program in a moment. However, it's worth noting they are a model for moving this work forward systematically in our district. District-wide arts integration will only be possible with the help of our arts specialists. With that, I've gathered data to assess the needs of our arts specialists so they can effectively teach their content area and also provide their expertise in the area of arts integration. In May of 2014, I administered a survey of all 171 arts teachers in each discipline. This included music, theater, dance, and visual and media art. The list of questions is in your packet, but we boiled the results down for you to focus on some fundamental challenges and successes, as well as suggestions for better serving the needs of arts teachers. Some main challenges for teachers are that site-specific master schedules don't allow enough instructional minutes or frequency of contact time for a genuine art experience. A second concern is budgetary support for supplies and material costs such as visual art supplies and a music curriculum adoption. Successfully, arts teachers feel like the culture of their respective schools supports a vibrant arts education, and 71% of our teachers identify arts education as a high leverage strategy for addressing goals of racial equity. Additionally, arts teachers identified specific areas they wanted to focus on for their professional development needs. The top 4 were curriculum development and a study of our new national core art standards, utilizing guest expert speakers within their respective disciplines, working on a district-wide arts articulation, and culturally relevant teaching practices. Armed with the data, I set out to create professional development opportunities for arts teachers that would set our sails for success. First, I established art teacher leads for all 4 disciplines. Throughout thoughtful planning, the teacher leads and I crafted job-alikes for the 14-15 school year that would meet the specific needs of each arts discipline. Through this year of job-alikes, we've toggled back and forth between providing large group work sessions that address the needs of the greater system, such as K-12 articulation, with small group sessions that provide workshop-style forums that foster growth in teaching. In the interim of meetings, I loop back around to individual teachers to provide one-on-one instructional coaching, curriculum development, arts integration ideas, and support with procuring supplies and materials for the classroom. The work of arts specialists is enhanced by the partnerships we've created with the major arts organizations in the city. Recently, at a visual art job-alike, we were able to have the Portland Art Museum as a guest. In their visit, the museum talked with teachers about what kinds of programs the museum could offer that would be useful to a teacher's classroom instruction. The museum also took the opportunity to educate teachers on how best to utilize the museum's many avenues for rich student learning. School districts across the nation with robust arts programs rely on partnerships with city arts organizations to provide enriching opportunities to schools. Portland Public Schools is no different. We currently have over 24 arts organizations in the city of Portland that provide services to our students through school residencies and/or school performances. In my role as Arts TOSA, I've met with nearly all our partnership organizations, and I'm working with the Regional Arts and Culture Council on creating a mapping tool that will help us spread these services out across the district with an equity and access lens. My final tier of TOSA responsibility lies in additional support throughout the district for principals in the way of arts programming, master schedules, recruiting qualified arts specialists and arts residencies, and I'm also communicating with facilities and maintenance around issues with music instruments, stages, kilns, and dance floors. Communication is essential in these exchanges between central office, teachers, administrators, and our community stakeholders. So it's with great excitement that I share with you the figures of our growth due to the City of Portland Arts Tax. In the intergovernmental agreement with the City of Portland, districts around our region have been encouraged to in-kind match the city's efforts in capitalizing on these resources. Thanks to the board, implementing a PPS Arts TOSA as an initial strategy was perfectly timed to support the plethora of new teachers in our system. Since the city's arts tax, we've gained 47.41 arts FTE. Now here's where we roll up our sleeves. Over time, we will need to consider our role in slowly rebuilding infrastructure and support. Our long-term vision includes capitalizing on the arts tax, exploring ways to strengthen our K-12 arts offerings through intentional programming, and deepening our partnerships. Next steps in realizing our vision include strengthening arts offerings in our K-8s for our 6th through 8th grade students and supporting cluster arts articulation, as well as providing supplies, materials, and curriculum to support arts education, collaborating with facilities on future school rebuilds and upgrades to accommodate arts programs, and establishing an Arts Advisory Council. The Arts Advisory Council would be a group of principals, teachers, arts community members, and parents to help examine data, further our vision, and address issues specific to PPS arts, as well as make recommendations to the board based on their findings. Now we'd like to illustrate an example of one of our blooming partnerships. Melissa Goff and I, as she said, asked Marna Stahlkup, who's the Director of Arts Education for the Regional Arts and Culture Council and founding program manager of the Right Brain Initiative, to be here to share some of the amazing services the Right Brain Initiative is providing our students and to highlight some of their nationally recognized data regarding English language learners.
Thank you, Kristen. Chairs, superintendent, and members of the board, it's my greatest pleasure to be here today to be part of this update on the state of affairs of arts education in Portland Public Schools. The Regional Arts and Culture Council is honored to have such an exemplary partnership as the one we have with PPS. In the past year, that relationship has steadily grown, in large part because of Kristen's work. Your commitment to reinstating the Arts TOSA position is commendable and will go miles towards serving your teachers and your students. At RAC, we think of arts education as the proverbial three-legged stool. We define a complete arts education as one that serves all students with sequential arts instruction provided by arts specialists in specific arts disciplines. Also, arts experiences that would be accessing the community's rich resources through field trips and assemblies, and also arts integration, which is the right brain model of finding the elegant fit between learning in the arts and other core content areas. So as you can see, this perfectly aligns with the support provided by the Arts TOSA position. A shared delivery model is key to the success of this approach. Arts specialists, classroom teachers, and teaching artists each have a role. And through Right Brain, their impact multiplies when given the opportunity to collaborate with one another. With the Right Brain Initiative, our vision is to transform learning for all students through the arts, creativity, innovation, and whole brain thinking. Right Brain began as an equity initiative committed to high-quality arts learning opportunities for all students. Also central to our work is the notion of whole brain thinking, where the left and the right sides of the brain work together to engage and motivate learners. Right Brain is also designed to develop students' 21st century skills. Also known as the 4 C's, these include critical thinking, creative and innovative thinking, collaboration, and multiple modes of communication. But knowing that the arts can also develop compassion, civic mindedness, and a sense of community, we've added our very own 5th C. A program of the Regional Arts and Culture Council, Right Brain is therefore a regional initiative and partners with school districts in RAC's Tri-County service area, specifically working with K-5, K-6, and K-8 schools. We began in the fall of 2008, reaching 9,000 students in 20 schools in 4 of the largest school districts in the region. You see here PPS in purple, Hillsborough is in yellow, Gresham Barlow in pink, and the North Clackamas district in green. We've grown each and every year and are now serving 20,000 students in 59 schools across 7 school districts, having added Corbett, Oregon Trail, and Estacada. The 6,321 students in 18 Portland Public Schools account for 32% of all Right Brain students, including all Jefferson feeder schools. RAC has taken the lead in the arts community in addressing the issue of equity and inclusion. We are committed to ensuring that everyone in our region, including the youngest in our community, has equal access to the arts. Credit goes to our local school districts, PPS especially, and their equity work on informing us. With equity also being one of Right Brain's guiding principles, the highest need schools are a priority. 11 of the 18, or 61%, of PPS Right Brain schools are designated as Title I. Reflective of Right Brain's partnership model is our 50-50 public-private funding structure. Extensive public funding, including school districts, shown F on this pie chart, the upper right wedge of that pie, has been significant in leveraging matching private support. Beginning in a school's second year of involvement, the district contributes $15 per student annually, which provides the funds for artists to work in classrooms in collaboration with teachers. But the magic doesn't just happen because an artist walks into the room. One essential component of Right Brain is a 3-year professional development sequence where teachers, principals, art specialists, and teaching artists learn together. Participants gain a common understanding of arts integration. They learn that it is an approach to teaching where students engage in a creative process which connects an art form and another subject area while honoring the learning objectives in both. A survey of classroom teachers who attended Right Brain Professional Development shows that 75% reported that they use arts-based instructional strategies on a regular basis, effectively making Right Brain part of their teaching toolkit. Another thing we've discovered in our research and evaluation is that as more and more teachers adopt this approach, that translates into whole school investment in the arts. An analysis of school arts maps that track grade-level arts learning shows that as schools become more engaged in Right Brain, nearly 90% provide additional arts experiences at every grade level, and in many cases, the amount doubles. We'd like to think of Right Brain as an ignition switch of sorts. It's no surprise that learning in and through the arts promotes both creative and critical thinking, and as a result, students become agents of and take charge of their own learning. They are problem solvers who take on tough questions with persistence and determination. Coded classroom observations and one-on-one interviews with students after an artist residency revealed that 90% describe themselves as active thinkers. They say such things as, I wondered, I tried, I imagined, rather than my teacher told me to, or I just followed the steps. In addition to these indicators of success, many of our stakeholders were interested in seeing the impact of Right Brain on student achievement, specifically on test scores. With support from Portland State University Center for Student Success, our evaluator analyzed OAK scores of students before their schools entered Right Brain and the same students after their schools joined the program. The sample size was really significant, with 19,000 student records examined from the 2007-8 school year, which was the year prior to Right Brain's launch, through the 2012-13 school year. The results were released in a report published in September 2014, and I'd like to share them with you now. So if we first look at reading scores, the average annual pre-Right Brain increase was 2 points. After the first year of Right Brain, scores on average increased an additional 4.8 points, which suggests that the increase was linked to involvement with Right Brain. There it is. But this was not just a one-time phenomenon. As schools continued their involvement, scores climbed again and again and again. Of course, we can't claim causality, but the correlation is evident. Similar increases exist in math scores. Before Right Brain, there was a 2.4-point annual average increase. After the first year and in each subsequent year, scores grew well beyond the average annual increase. Even more dramatic is the impact on English learners. As they are learning the language, the arts allow them to access content and demonstrate understanding through non-linguistic means. Here, average annual English language proficiency assessment increases of 1.3 points jumped 10 times after joining Right Brain. Again, scores climbed, continued to rise, indicating continued impact over time. Perhaps the most telling and powerful evidence comes from students themselves. Last spring, I had the great pleasure of interviewing Iman, a 7th grader at Beach K-8, during a Right Brain residency with a media artist in her language arts social studies class. The essential question for the year was, who are my people? To close, I invite you to listen to this 1.5-minute excerpt as she shares her insight and reflects on her learning process.
One thing I did notice that a lot of the questions weren't necessarily about me, but kind of like about the people around me. And one of my questions was, they have the who are your people question, but I also asked, who are you? Because that's a very important part of who your people are, because as individuals, we can choose who our people are. like we can, like, well, we can't choose, but we can claim who our people are. And to understand what we're claiming, we have to first know who we are. I think it's really interesting. Like, we are using 3 ways to express who we are and who our people are. We are expressing it first with our own words, then we are expressing it in writing, and then we are expressing it in art and pictures. My flag, it's going to be kind of like a zipper flag because it's going to have some things that maybe people think about me or it looks like on the outside, and like my soul or like my inside is all family, and that's something I know.
There's one final slide. All this is really to say that learning in the arts is both hands-on and minds-on. Thank you.
So we're going to have a time for questions, but before we do, I wanted to make sure and acknowledge the board for approving the $925,000 music instrument purchase to fill the gaps in programs that we're existing without. Your investment is putting us one step closer to fully funding arts programming, so thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. I'm sure there are comments, questions from my colleagues. Dr. Buell.
On this arts FD in grade 6 through 8, now how much of that, is it all of the money on here? Is all of the money that's on here come from the Portland Public Schools? I mean, how does one school, I don't understand how one school has 0 and another school has 2, another school has 1. How does that come about, do we think? What's happening there?
It's all PPS FTE. It just means that in a K-8 school, if it says 0, that the 6th through 8th graders in that school are not receiving any arts offerings, any FTE'd arts offerings.
Right, I understand that, but how did this come about? That we have some with some arts and others with no arts? Is that a principal?
Site-based decisions.
Site-based,
yes,
totally site-based.
And you know, it is there are certain principals that they're making some hard decisions about what priorities are in their schools.
For instance?
Boise Elliott Humboldt goes without an RJ, a full-time RJ coordinator or reading specialists that they could use. So those are some examples of what they take away to have arts in their programs.
Class size?
I couldn't speak to
class size, you up your class sizes and that allows you to have an art person, which kind of would play towards more economically advantaged neighborhoods to have art people, because if you up your class size, then you can have more FTE left over. If you lower your class sizes, you have less FTE. So that would be one way you could approach it, as I understand it.
So I haven't seen that playing out in the scheduling of our schools as the reason to not have arts instruction at the middle school.
No, I mean, it's a reason to have arts instruction, not to not have. If you keep your class size down, then you don't get arts instruction. If you keep your class sizes higher, you can get arts instruction, and you can keep your class size higher in certain schools much easier than you can in other schools. So it's kind of a inequity,
so
I think, that comes about. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Excuse me. I haven't seen that as a strategy to increase arts instruction at our schools. I have not seen increasing class size in order to increase arts instruction.
So maybe I could just do a follow-up, just a question about what the strategy or plan will be to address. I mean, you definitely pulled that out as one of your key issues and concerns. So where we have 0 arts instruction, particularly for 6th through 8th graders, can you talk about that a little bit?
I think that because the arts tax is so new, and my position is so new, that's why it's going to be really important for us to have a council of people that come together so we can really look at the data and see how we can be moving forward. We're making slow progress and it's going to take some time, so those answers aren't necessarily there yet, but we will be moving toward that as we establish some arts advisory council work.
And so the place for those investments are through the district staffing team, and the investments that we make at the secondary level allow for further elective offerings for students at those grade levels.
Director Knowles.
I'd like to just start by saying thank you very much. I had the pleasure of being at the arts presentation last week. It was phenomenal. I was blown away by our students, and I can't say enough about how wonderful it is, and I hope that everybody at some time has an opportunity to see how talented our students are. Everything from visual arts that was in the lobby. I know a superintendent I know Eloise Damrosch, the executive director from RAC, was trying to buy a painting off of a fourth grader who refused to give it to her. So everything from visual arts to dance to music to drama, I was just blown away. And I also want to say, as one of the members of the RAC board at the time that we started the Right Brain Initiative, I'm so happy to see where it is today. What phenomenal growth, and what a great opportunity for our schools. And what yet another great opportunity for Portland Public Schools to show how we can be a great partner to others in the community to help our students. So my thanks to RAC, in addition to my thanks to the voters for passing the arts tax that allows us to have these teachers in our schools, so that, and arts specialists and Kristen, so that we can begin to build back the arts in our schools. And I'm particularly interested in how we are working on articulation across, which is one of the reasons that I get concerned about the gap in 6-8, when our students would just be probably starting instruments if they didn't have them in elementary school. And if they had them in elementary school, then they don't have them when they're at 6-8. So there are a lot of different things that I think we need to be very careful about as we develop an articulation. And for that reason, I'm very excited that you've been talking about an arts advisory group. I think that will be a benefit to the district to have some professionals both in the community and outside to help us do that. I did have a couple of questions. One question. There's a chart in here this one, the rainbow chart.
Yes.
Yeah, that one of the areas that is in every one of the categories, and pretty high up in all of them, but you didn't mention in your discussion, was generating revenue for the program. So, I think that's a great thing, but I'm curious about, is that something that we are doing at Portland Public? I know there are many foundations that support arts education, and so I'm not sure if that's the intent, or are we going to start charging people to come see our performances, or what's the generate revenue for programs all about?
I think a lot of arts teachers, myself included when I was in the classroom, need some support that doesn't necessarily come with the package, the FTE package, and so we end up trying to find ways to fill in. And sometimes that would happen through us providing a performance where we would charge for tickets, and then that revenue we'd put back into our program to make investments for kids. But that's not district-wide. It happens in pockets, and every school is different with how they function with it. Some PTAs are able to help bridge the gaps and subsidize some stuff, and some aren't. So it's really a mishmash. But I think that comes out a lot in not having an arts TOSA for about 8 years,
Right.
well, 4 years. I think people are really struggling to find ways to support their work, and not knowing an avenue to reach out to do that. So this is just sort of beginning the conversation. That was the first thing on the list.
So, Kristen, in your job, do you help teachers find sources of revenue? Are you helping to identify grant opportunities or others in the community who provide those kinds of funds for our schools?
So what's been helpful thus far is that we have some superstar arts teachers in the district that have figured out something that works really well. And so we've used them in some of these smaller workshops to teach others how to help support the infrastructure of their individual programs.
Okay. Well, again, thank you very much, and I also, since I didn't mention it yet, would reinforce your comments about how important arts education is to the whole child and to their ability to learn in so many other ways. I saw it happen with my own children. I've seen it happen with children across the district, and so again, I just want to say thank you, and thank you, Marna, for being here tonight to talk about Right Brain.
Thank you.
Director Regan.
Hi, thanks for being here. I love the fact that we're celebrating the arts, and it was Cleveland students who were here. Absolutely amazing to watch their performance, and thank you for that. What I wanted to ask about, and what I thought this presentation was going to be about, was more of a budget-focused presentation on what we're looking forward to for next year. Because for a while, I think we've been asking about, okay, we've got the K-5 arts tax. How are we kind of moving it into 6 through 8? So maybe I misunderstood what this presentation was going to be. Are we also going to be doing another arts presentation during the budget process to better understand what we're looking at going forward? Or is this it?
No. So this was really an update on what's going on with our arts programming, and what we're going to do is the things that actually come forward in the budget proposal will then do more in-depth, what are those things that you're wanting to learn more about that come forward in the budget proposal. Because we kind of flipped it this year, so you're really learning, and people have made their asks of what things they'd like included in the budget, but you're really hearing what's the state of the program tonight.
So I want to make sure I understand what you just said. Are we going to be getting another presentation specifically during the budget process around the arts articulation?
No, not unless you ask for it.
Okay,
so
I'm asking for it.
So
I'm
okay,
asking for
so
it.
then so you could ask for it. Yeah.
What I'm trying to understand is we have the K-5. We had an IGA with the city when we accepted the money for the arts tax. The expectation was that we were going to be doing a K-12 articulation, and we were also going to be looking at a cluster articulation. And what I want to understand in terms of the budget next year is where are we at on that? What are the monies that are going to be needed? Because I have some real concerns when I see charts like this, which talks about, arts FTE in grades 6 through 8. Yes, you see 12 schools that have 0 arts, and you see some that have up to 5. But when you look at our amount that we allocate in each of those schools, for example, on a per student basis, it isn't, to me, this isn't a funding decision. It's more of a decision at the school level on whether we're going to put the money in the arts or not. And so I get concerned when I see statements like, there are 12 K-8 schools that do not have any arts offerings for their 6th or 8th grade students. The attached documentation gives a full view of which schools live in the gap and need additional arts FTE support, because I'm not sure that's what that is showing. It's just more showing the decisions that are being made at the local level. So, for example, in the last budget cycle, we as a board made a decision that every K-5 school would have a minimum of a half-time counselor in every school. And we funded that. What I want to know is what is it that we should be doing going forward in terms of our 6 through 8 articulation that would be similar, so that we make sure that we are providing arts to every 6th or 8th grade student, and what's it going to take? And I don't know if that's going to look different in each cluster or not, depending on what the high school might want to offer. But so this is a great presentation. I'm thrilled to see all the community partnerships. I'm thrilled to see the celebration, but I want more specifics on where we're going from here to build the program from K-5, which the taxpayers helped us with, on through 6 through 8, and what it is that you need from us in the budget to make it happen, or what it is you need in terms of more directives to our principals on what will be offered to our students. So that's what I'm looking for. So,
okay.
So I appreciate the presentation. It's not quite what I'm needing yet in terms of the budget.
So a couple things I'll just throw in here, Bobby, because Kristen has been actually doing a visual mapping of what we actually, it's color-coded by cluster that shows what arts are exist in each cluster, so you can see where we have articulation and where we have gaps. I mean, so she has been putting something together like that. And what you're describing is both a function of what's the guidance we give principals about what are the minimum program offerings you will do with the staff you get. And I think we're just, and some part of what you see here is also a function of the size of the middle grades in the K-8s that you're looking at, and what amount of staffing you get, and what amount you're willing to then perhaps give more in order to have more electives. I mean, this is part of our K-8 middle school, because you see the middle schools that have like very rich elective offerings, which is what we've known, because this is the thing that people call out about. This is what you get when you have a middle school, and less of that when you've got a small number of students in the middle grades at a K-8. So, and yes, we will be looking at some of this during the budget. So.
And I do believe we could share tonight the cluster map.
Do you have that? Awesome,
yes,
great.
So other questions? Director Buell.
And actually, I'm going to just say Krista may want to do a little explanation about this
Sorry,
once it's
hold on
passed
just
out.
one sec. Dr. Buell, we'll look at the chart first. It's coming around.
Did you save one for yourself?
I did. So if you look at the, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I know some of the, in some of the clusters, they've been very intentional about talking about what they're actually building through the cluster and being intentional about articulation, and others, the intentionality is coming now.
Yeah,
How's that?
The conversation is just starting. So what you see in fragmentation in our district is just because we haven't been together to have the conversation. And so good news is that we've got a lot of data to move forward. If you look at the Cleveland map, just to explain it, Cleveland's at the bottom, and then you grow out from there in a feeder pattern. It tells you broken down by color how it moves forward, so you can kind of see it a little better. It's a lot of information to look at. But one example is the Cleveland choir that you just saw. Selwood Middle School doesn't offer choir, nor does Hosford, nor does Lane. So in terms of a pattern that you can get there, it kind of gets, it's disjointed. So that's an example, but it also works that way in terms of our band programming too. So, music takes on many different faces. And so how can we be intentional about, in this cluster, we want to have a strong choir representation, or band, or strings, whatever we're looking at. But those are all questions that many people coming together will need to decide and then make recommendations.
Okay, so when I'm looking at this, and it says Beach has visual arts 0.5 and music 0.7, and this says it's got 0. Talk to me about what that would, what does that mean?
Yeah, so because that's in it, the K-5 is getting that.
But not the middle grade.
Not the middle grade,
okay,
yeah.
Thanks.
So what about Beverly Cleary? Because I know they've got a great jazz band, because we heard them last week, right? It says
that's
0?
Beaumont.
Was it Beaumont?
Yeah, that was Beaumont,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, you're right. I remember.
Director Buell.
Geez, I hate to ask my question following those two. This has to do a lot with what I've talked a lot about, which is having a foundational, what is a good education. So let's just pick one of these schools down here. Irvington has no 6-8 FD in the arts. Why is that Irvington? Is that because their principal decided that they needed something else, or because they couldn't figure out how to do it and also do all their reading teachers? Or, I mean, how does that come about? We're not saying you need to have any arts in the 6-8. So how does a school end up with none? What's that decision-making process that gets there?
I'm going to draw you back to this picture right here, which is where we were with the K-5s before we had the arts tax, which was very little, right? So you're seeing partly this is the boost of the arts tax,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And where we're in the process of building. We're the first year of an arts TOSA. And so this is exactly what it is. We're at the front end of that, Steve, in terms of how are we intentionally starting to build back. But
that's why I asked my
Yes.
question too, is if we're going to be intentional about it, we need the roadmap. And we know next year with our levy tax being renewed that we have another 45 teachers coming in. I mean, how is it that we're going to employ them in a situation like this?
I mean,
And
Irvington could
what's-
be.
What's the map?
Irvington could be, arts could be the 5th choice of that principal out there. I don't know. They're getting left out. We don't have a basic, we don't believe that every kid in the 6 through 8 should have arts, evidently. Otherwise, we would have it.
Yes, we do. That's why we're talking about it.
But I mean, but we don't have it in how many schools? 1, 2, 3, 4,
That's
5,
because
6,
we
7,
were
8, 9,
unfunded
10,
for so
11,
many years.
12. So, but it's because we're making other choices. It's not just from
You have a $40
unfunded.
million cut, it makes a difference.
Well, yes, it does, but this year we didn't have that $40
But I
million
think, but we have to
cut,
build
did
back
we?
from that.
And
We have to build
also,
back.
but we didn't have that cut this year. That's
Nope.
what I'm asking about. We did have $14 million worth of consultants for general education, of course, but we didn't have any arts in any of these schools. So is our idea that in the next budget, we will have arts in these schools? Or are we still going to leave it up and maybe it's the 5th line down? I'm just confused about the whole situation, actually. I don't understand how it works. How they end up with nothing in the arts, and we say, well, it's a principal's choice. But there's got to be more to it than the principal decides we don't want to have arts in our school, and then the principal up here decides we want to have arts in our school. There's got to be more at play here than what appears
I think
to
it's what,
come forward, and I'm kind of asking the people here, or the
she's
superintendent,
already-
I think,
they've
not
already-
somebody else's.
they've already
deal.
articulated that we're
Well,
rebuilding.
I'm
as
asking them,
superintendent.
I'm not really asking you, Ruth.
Well,
I
they've
mean, if
already
they
said
want
what
to
you're
say that
asking
they've
about.
already articulated, it's fine, but I don't really want you answering their question for them.
So I do believe we answered that earlier, so
Okay,
as.
fine, if you want to say that.
So,
I
great,
never saw it.
so I am, any other comments?
So,
Director
and I'm going to just
Kruger,
do a
or-
little bit more to Bobby's point, is part of what, so on March 9th, part of what I will bring forward is a staffing plan, or a proposed staffing plan, which will include the things that I've gotten from all of the various departments and from the district staffing team, which is making a recommendation about how we actually do our school-based staffing. So you're hearing ingredients. We're not putting forward giant budget proposals, because everybody would, like, I'm going to come forward with a budget proposal that includes the things I've heard from all these departments. What you're getting tonight is the content of it. So yes, you will get a proposal, and this is really more to Director Regan's comment.
So in the budget
Yeah.
proposal, we'll have art in these schools?
You will
At
have
6 through 8?
You will have elements of the things that I'm putting forward to you about how I would prioritize, given the amount of staff we have to work with and what the needs are that I've heard come forward from the department. So that'll be on the 9th,
Yeah. So Director Belial?
So stay tuned, yeah. It's not complete yet, so this is why that's what I'm working on to bring you on the 9th. And I'm hearing from all of the departments, including these guys, about
Right.
what the needs are and how I would prioritize, that you'll get to weigh in on.
Great.
Well, it just doesn't seem that, if we're leaving it up to the principals and they're choosing to not have it, it wouldn't make any difference what you prioritized, would it?
Well, it
I mean,
could, though.
That's
So-
what I'm wondering, if it,
And that's so Steve, part of what we do each year is we publish guidance to the principals of here's your staffing and here's what we're saying here are the core things that we need you to offer. The level of funding has been below the ability to offer everything. So we have done, okay, you have to have at least X amount of PE or X amount of your library open X amount of time, this amount of, so we've done very specific, here are all the things you need to cover with your staffing allocation. It could be that we're also saying, so we could add guidance for principals if we're adding additional staff, that we're also saying you must have an arts offering. So that those are the kinds of things that we do when we're in the budget
so
cycle.
essentially, we didn't say this last year that you needed to have an arts offering. We just
we
passed
did not.
on it because we said that you couldn't afford it, even though you could have afforded it.
No, and I hear your
It's $1 million
concern.
here.
It's a concern for all of us.
Thank
That would
you.
be a concern for all of us. Thank you, Steve.
So Director Belial.
So first, I want to say thank you for the presentation, and I'm so sorry that I wasn't able to make it down to the Newmark and see the wonderful performances, but I've heard great things about it, so thank you for putting that together. I also want to echo the thanks to the Right Brain Initiative. Not only I know is it a national model, but at a time when we were making those millions of dollars of cuts, you were the thing that literally kept any semblance of arts in our schools for the most part. So thank you. Thank you for that, and thank you for continuing. As I go around and I hear about teachers using arts in their classroom, that arts integration, it's such an important part. And now for the downside. It's long been my frustration that we've relied on Rates Brain Initiative to do the arts. That arts integration is not enough. And I would contend that we be really, really careful of asking art specialists in our classroom or in our schools to also have a double duty of then being forced to be the people to integrate arts into the general ed classroom. Not that it shouldn't be a natural symbiotic relationship, but arts for art's sake, it will do all these things. It will do, it will do all these things, but arts for art's sake is enough, and it will have payoff and benefits. So I just want to reiterate that. And before I get into my main points and main questions, I see that we have a couple of PTA leaders in the back of our room, and I just want to mention somebody had said that PTAs sometimes can contribute or some can support and some can't. And I would really like to work with our partners at the PTA to find out ways that our PTAs can support all schools, not just the places where they can. Is there a way that we can bring more equity to that? I know that the PTA is very interested, or I imagine they would be, because they're always looking for all students and all voices. But I would just like to extend an offer to our PTA leadership that we look for ways of doing that across our system. With that, I just want to say thank you for giving us the articulation. It feels like it's really in the early stages, which after only 1 year, I totally get it. And I think what I hear from my colleagues, and they can correct me without more details, but that there is some interest in looking at being more directive with our arts instruction. And that's very exciting to me. I think of some of our neighborhood districts who, even through the budget cuts, did in fact wind up increasing class sizes, but they kept their band, orchestra, choir, and every kid, whether they wanted it or not, participated. And they're seeing, and they've seen fantastic results as a result of it. It's because their students are engaged, they are using both sides of their brain, and it does all of these great things that are extolled as benefits, but it's an important piece. And so I just want to say whatever support I can provide for that, and again, I just want to remind that I think I'm hearing interest in saying, what do we need in a 5-year plan or a 2-year plan or this year to begin to build that intentionally, so that, and it's, again, I have confidence. I've met enough of our principals, and some of them are here in the audience. They're making really hard choices and great choices, and some of them, even though the FTE might not be here, they might have had another partner that came in for a while before or after school. So it's not always that they're absent. It might not always tell the right picture. At the same time, we have to find, I'd like us to find some sort of core that we begin to hold on to and build to. So thank you.
All right, so we're going to move on now. Thank you
One more
so
question.
very much. No, I'm sorry, we're going to move on. Thank you
Pretty
very
good
much,
question,
and we look
though.
forward to hearing more about this and through the budget process, so that'll be great.
You guys, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. All right, so thank you. I think you're hearing some of the pent-up
Just
urgency and
foundation.
excitement from the board, so thanks so much for all your
Thank
great
you.
work.
Foundation.
So 2015 standard interdistrict transfer procedures, perhaps not quite as exciting for us, but a very important issue. Well, do you have an a cappella group accompanying you? That's all I'm saying. Sorry, no, Judy, no, sorry.
Come on, Judy, you can do it.
It's awesome. Okay, Superintendent Smith, would you like to introduce this great next item on our agenda?
I would. So Judy Brennan, who's the Director of Enrollment and Transfer, is going to present a proposal for the 2015 Standard Interdistrict Transfer Procedures, which we are required to do every year. And the vote on this comes at the next meeting, so you're really just learning the proposed response.
Great. Thank you so much. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you, and that is a tough act to follow. I will try and be brief and let you move on to, and let you continue to savor what you heard in that.
Can you sing your presentation?
I'm sorry?
Can you sing your presentation for me?
You will not be happy.
Actually, she probably can.
But you won't be happy. Okay, so recently I was here with you discussing the other way that interdistrict transfers get done, the open enrollment, which we opt out of. This is the discussion about the standard. There's a couple of things there are a couple of actions that you as a board need to commit to. That's part of the new laws that came in 2014. Prior to 2014, boards weren't required every year to decide whether to engage in the process and to announce whether you were open, closed, or putting limits on it. You need to do that now, and we would like you to do that in March so that we can begin the process of contacting families and making sure they know what they have to do so that they can remain here in our schools and participate in great arts programs like you just heard about. Okay, so a little bit of information and context. There's a map that you all have, and here's a visual on the screen that's just a reminder that we have students who live in other districts attending Portland schools everywhere. And the size of the dot equals the proportion of students, the number of students. Most of the students who attend Portland Public Schools but reside in other districts started here as residents, have moved to other places, and have chosen to try and finish what they started, perhaps because of the wonderful arts opportunities like those that you just heard of. And a notable exception is Kelly, which houses our Russian immersion program, which serves a population that 63% of the students in that program are from other districts. That has a lot to do with how the population is moved, and is a reminder to us to work with those other districts to find the best possible solution so that students aren't subjected to really difficult procedures for having to enroll in the program, and that we have appropriate space for the program. Okay, so here's a little bit more about what we did last year in the new process, both with the students that we approved, the incoming students, and the students that we released. Those are the outgoing students. So here's our approvals. As you saw on the chart, or on the what the map that you just saw equals 846 enrolled students who reside in other districts. Because they are attending PPS, we have demographic information about them, and 74% of those students qualify as combined underserved. That list includes 579 students who received permission last year from us as PPS and from their resident district, and so don't have to participate in that approval process in the future. So last year, we had to get approval for all of the kids who wanted to stay. We went through that. Most of them don't need to do it again. However, there are also about 300 students, I think it's 270, who started the year as residents, have moved, and now do have to go through the process. So that's a little staggering, but it's an indication of the mobility that we see within our district. About, on average, 50 students moving across district lines every month. So that's what we have to factor for in coming up with the process for this year. In terms of the students that we released out of PPS, unlike the students coming in, our job last year was only to release the students who needed it for the first time. So any students who had been released in prior years or who had been approved through that open enrollment process, we didn't have to go through an approval process for them again. But we did have new students who asked to be released. A total of 106 applied. We released 40 to other districts. In that, we gave priority to students who were already attending the requested school, so who already had a relationship with that school or who had a sibling attending. And I want to remind you again that when we talk about releases and these numbers, it doesn't include the students who were approved through that open enrollment. So in sum, here's the chart that really doesn't look as good as all the lovely arts pictures that you saw a moment ago. But I didn't have time to fix it. I've sorted out, I've just shared this with you tonight. It's the interaction that we have through interdistricts with the top 10 districts. And I've sorted it by the rate of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch in those districts. Just to give you, and the reason that I did that is we can't ask questions about all of our applicants, who's coming and who's going, but we do know the districts that they're coming from. Now, a student isn't a district, so I'm not indicating that only these students either qualified or didn't qualify for free and reduced meals, but just to give you that sense of where kids are coming from and where they're going to through this process. So the first is that the first thing that you can note is we, as you know, we share a large part of our border with David Douglas, a large district on the east. That's where we have the most transactions through inter-district transfers. 271 of their students applied in last year. 205 wound up actually attending. So this final count accepted column, so that's the third column over, there we go, gives you the count of who actually showed up. And one of our learnings from this year is that there's a lot of difference between the people who apply, who might even get approved, and those that actually show up, because families are constantly in motion and making other decisions. So I think you can see from this that we have mostly students from the east, from the south, who are coming in, relatively high rates. Not very many students going out to those districts, requesting to go out. We don't have very many students coming in from western districts, and we have a higher number of students applying out to the districts that are west and southwest of us. These are the totals who came in through our process last year from those 10 districts, which you can see is the majority of all of the students that wound up coming in this year at the start of the school year who live in other districts, and those that went out. I did add the open enrollment column here so that you can see what the sort of total impact of students leaving PPS was for the year. I know that this number compared to this number looks very small, but it does change when you add in the effect of open enrollment out. So,
Judy, can you remind us how the money flows? How the money follows the kid, or what happens?
yeah, state funds follow the students.
So in every case? In every case?
In every case, if both districts agree, what we've agreed to is to transfer state school funds. So that's the technical name of the document that follows the students. So now that we are completely in the left part of our brain, I'd like to briefly describe what we propose for the coming year. And this is a very quantitative proposal because that's essentially the decision that you have to make. I've got a little bit more about some of the qualitative elements that go with this. We do recommend that Portland Public Schools be open to standard inter-district transfers for the coming year, and that we release up to 50 PPS residents to other districts and accept up to 300 non-resident students into PPS. That 300 is our best guess at the total number of currently attending students who would need a transfer to come back next year, plus some room for new students in places where we believe we would have them. If there are more applicants than space, we would ask that we continue to prioritize students who are either currently enrolled in a school or who have a co-enrolled sibling at that school, and then we would use a random lottery as tiebreakers if necessary. So a little bit about what we learned from last year and what we think it means for process this year. A big lesson learned is that we need to work with families to get releases from their resident district before we give them approval to attend PPS, because that turned out to be a false promise for a number of families, and they did the work of getting our, they worked with us, they got our approval, and then they relaxed. But unfortunately, sometimes that meant they missed the deadline, or they didn't make it in their resident district's lottery, and then it was even greater disappointment even later than it had to be. So we want to start earlier. That's why we're asking you to give us permission earlier. And we intend to know what families need, which means knowing a lot about what's going on in their resident district, not just here. We have to know about what's over there, help families navigate that, communicate in their native language when necessary, and do what we can to walk them through that process. Once they get that release, we pledge to make our end of it as simple as possible, particularly for those families that we already know because they're in our schools. The other big lesson learned is that the numbers are going to move all the time, and so we need to be able to be adaptable along the way. We kept waiting for a moment last summer when we had our numbers and we were done, but the minute we thought we were done, new families would go and a new family with needs would come, and we needed to open the doors again. So we, even though this is a much more state-controlled process now, and it seems much more tight in the box of limitations. We've had to find ways to build in some flexibility for that to be adaptable to families. So what that might mean is that we have to come back to you at some point to adjust the numbers because you have to set those numbers, but hopefully we're going to get them right, and whatever you approve next week will be what our families need. I also want to mention that we've got some ongoing efforts at the state level. There is a working group of staff and district superintendents, and they're trying to align and improve a process that brings open enrollment and standard interdistricts together. So that means that there will be additional legislation on this. We don't know if it's going to be, if the legislature will actually take it up this year. It likely wouldn't be implemented till 2016. So we have a year off without new legislation, but there's probably more changes coming. In the meantime, our biggest efforts are local, and that means improving our common practices across the metro region. Fortunately, our superintendent participates in a countywide group where these issues come up and get discussed. We right now have a survey, a Google survey out there with our colleagues from other districts, and so we are trying to figure out what those dates are and who's participating and what. I also regrettably have to say that some of the things that we pledged to have done by now are not done. So I'm just going to be really transparent about that. We have not yet changed the policy and administrative directive. It's important to do that, and we want to bring that to you hopefully by the end of this school year. And we've got some other things that are just some loose ends. So this is a constant work in progress, and it doesn't affect that many families, but the families that it would affect, it's so important that we really have to know what we're talking about when it's time to talk about it. So I just want you to know that we are committed to all the loose ends, even though there's still some of them out there. And then finally, I was hoping to hear from you as part of your comments what you think about the notion of parity in students coming and going from districts. And the reason I bring this up is that it's pretty clear in that state level working group, they're recommending, one of their prime recommendations is that districts would have equal numbers of students who were able to come and leave a district as part of inter-district transfers in the future. And so that means the same amount of slots in as out. Now there's no mandate to do this yet, and it may never happen. If it does happen, it wouldn't happen for at least a year. However, I wanted you to be aware of it and provide some guidance on whether you think it's a way that we should start moving in the short term. What it would mean, essentially, is that we would be releasing more students, and based on what you saw in the numbers, that means more of those students would be going to schools likely in the West and Southwest, or we would be accepting fewer students, which means we would likely be taking in fewer students who come to us from the East and the Southeast. So I'll flip back quickly to my very pretty slide here, reminding you where the students are coming from now. Not all of them are getting in, but this year we expect that we'll need about 300 slots for the incoming, and if the applicant pool looks similar to last year, you can get a sense of where those kids would be coming from. If we take less than 300, we're likely to be affecting students who may be more likely to, well, I'll remind you that 74% of the kids that we're serving now qualify as combined underserved. So students that we would normally want to prioritize for equitable access to programs. Students leaving would be a higher proportion of students, most likely going to schools West and Southwest. Lake Oswego, Riverdale are striking in the number of applicants out, given that we have very few transactions with kids coming in. By the way, the schools that I know of that are open again for open enrollment this year, David Douglas, North Clackamas, and Lake Oswego are confirmed to be open again for open enrollment. So that's my parity question. Should we begin moving closer to parity, which would mean tightening up those numbers now, or is this a good enough to maintain where we are? What's your recommendation? I'll hear from you, come back with a resolution that hopefully you'll be able to vote on, and we'll get started. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Questions and comments in response to the specific request for input around the parity question? Director Bilal?
Hi, I liked your presentation.
It was very nice.
So, a couple of thoughts to your question about what you're looking for input about incoming and outgoing. To me, to set them on parity reminds me of a little bit of a technical bureaucratic fix. Like a school district saying, we need to be able to count on enrollment numbers, we don't want to lose money, and we want to try to keep the same amount of money we have, and so therefore the same number going out should come in. Which seems, if I interpret the spirit of what I thought open enrollment originally was, about trying to find the right fit for a student and giving families a place to go from one district to another when it made sense for the family, that doesn't feel like the right solution. But it's not uncommon for statewide decisions to not make a lot of sense at the local level. It's tough across that many districts. I'll just stop with that.
Thank you.
Director Knowles.
Thank you, Judy. It's interesting. It's also confusing to me sometimes. So appreciate your presentation. Around the parity question, my understanding is that the reason that we let students come in or leave is that, especially those coming in, is that they have been students here at PPS in the past. They move out. They want to continue at the school where they have been. Is that the majority, or is that everybody, or is that the case with most of the students that are coming in?
For Portland Public Schools, that's absolutely mostly the case.
Okay.
I would say that may not be the case for many other districts who are participating in this.
Okay. Well, I guess then I would be saying the same thing as Director Blyle, and I believe that if we have students who have been here and they're our students and they want to continue to go to school with us, then we should be so happy to have them enjoying their experience here at Portland Public Schools and wanting to continue.
So can I ask a clarifying question? Is the parity between individual districts the same number go in and out? It's overall, if you can just, I'm having
We're
trouble.
not allowed to set slots by district.
Right. Okay.
It has to be a general number.
So what they're saying is that every district would have the same, I'm just having my right.
So the latest draft that I saw said that if a district chooses to limit the number of students, then there would be a cap on that limit, and that the cap would be the same for all districts. And that cap, as in the latest draft, and this is only a draft, would be 3% of total enrollment. Well, in our case, that would be 1,500 students. So I'm not sure that, that's something that David Williams and I have had a lot of conversations about, and I know he's trying to help watch very closely the progress of that. But in the absence of such a, sort of arbitrary and large number, then the alternative would just be that you just can't have any more slots in than you have slots out. So if you say you're open to 300 students coming in, then you have to be willing to say you're also open to 300 students going out.
Okay, thank you. Mina.
Sure. So for that question, I think it's important to look at who's transferring in and out. If you look at the students transferring in, they're mostly students who have found support at the school that they want to stay at, and they found something that makes them want to go to school, and they might not have a lot of resources at home. So if they really like the school, we should allow them to stay, because that's a huge success. And for the students who are transferring out, a lot of them are to Lake Oswego and Riverdale. So I think that they have their other reasons, very different from the families transferring in. And I don't think we should force anybody out of the pool transferring in, nor should we force anybody to transfer out. So I think that we should just stay with the populations who do want to come into our schools being a lot higher, and then allow whoever wants to attend other schools too as well, just to really think about the families and make sure we're being equitable in our decisions.
Thank you. Dr. Buell.
Thank you for allowing me to ask a question. I appreciate it. What are the restrictions on kids transferring in? What restrictions do we have? Are you restricted from what school you can go to, or are you restricted based on For instance, I've got a kid out there in David Douglas, and I want to go to Alameda. Can I transfer that kid to Alameda?
No,
if
we
there's
get to
room?
decide. So technically, the transfer is into the district, and then we decide where we have space by school. So if
Do we offer you then
Alameda,
options in space? Here's where we have space for you, like that?
yes, although since most of our slots will go to current students, what we want to do is assure that a current student can remain where they are, even if it's Alameda, which would normally be closed to transfers. So it isn't, we probably won't produce a big chart saying exactly where every space is. We would approve students. We allow families to tell us where they'd like to go, and then we match that with where we have space by working with the principal.
Well, I think my question has to do with the neighborhood-to-neighborhood transfer, which
Okay.
we no longer allow children to decide where they want to go and transfer neighborhood to neighborhood without going through a specific process. But can you sidetrack that process by coming into the district from outside? In other words, are we offering things to people outside and offering them, oh, yes, you're living in David Douglas now and you get to go to school A, but I'm sorry, over here, you're living down in school C, but you don't get to go to school A? Do we have any, is that anything that we're thought about or looked at, or?
Director Beal, we've absolutely thought about that. It's a little ironic that at the same time that Portland Public Schools is moving to a neighborhood transfer system where people, should have a reason, and we need to be thoughtful about those. At the same time, the state is giving us guidance to make transfers more blind and less based on students' actual reasons or needs. What we know from our last experience with this is that there were very few applications into PPS to neighborhood schools for new students. So we saw applications for specialized programs like immersion, but to just standard neighborhood schools for students who had not attended there and didn't have a sibling, there were very few of those transfers.
Like very few, what percentage of the 836 or whatever?
I'm going to say 5%.
So 40?
Approximately.
Okay.
And of those, we would look to see if it was a school where we had, here's what I think we will do in that case. We would look to see if it was a school where we had been able to place PPS, neighborhood to neighborhood transfers that qualified. And if the school had been open to those, meaning they had had space for that, we may contact to see if they have additional space for non-resident students. I think there'll be few of those, and I think that that's how we're likely to handle it. Unfortunately, we won't be able to ask questions about why a student would want to go there and whether a different type of school might meet their needs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Director Regan. So I'm not remembering that we have been put in this place before where we've had to set kind of a cap. Is this completely, utterly new? Or?
It was completely, utterly new for you in May 2014, which is less than a year ago.
So my question is, do we have any opportunity to set a range? Because you were saying to us that you might have to come back to us. Is there a possibility to set a range?
You set the upper limit.
You came back to us last year.
We came back last year.
I did. I had to come back in September and squeeze in a vote from you to up the range for outgoing students. So if you feel like these numbers might be too small, now would be the time to let me know. And I recognize that that's a difficult place to put you in because you haven't spent the time that I have trying to look at who's applying and what it means by school. And so I'm happy to provide additional information in the meantime, but the law does require that you decide whether you're going to limit, and if you limit, what are you limiting it to?
So you're proposing 50 slots out and 300 in?
Correct.
Okay.
That's on top of?
For this coming year?
So those would be new decisions on top of all the decisions that have already been made.
The 800 and some.
Pardon?
The 800 and some?
The 500 and some. So incoming?
Yeah, incoming was?
About 580 already made. We'll probably need to make about 300 more for students who are in our buildings now, or, yeah.
Director Blau.
I just want to thank Mina for pointing out a question that I had earlier too, right? When I see the applicants out and I think of our own experience with neighborhood to neighborhood transfers and the inequities that it wound up breeding, I would hope that in our discussions, and I'll put this as a note to myself to discuss with our legislators when we go down, but we saw a pattern of who was using the inter-district transfer, and I was appreciative to hear that the folks that we're letting come back in are a majority of historically underserved. And I just want to highlight that while we said that districts are no longer able to consider the individual needs of students, that was actually the best, again, at the state level, our state legislature could do, because we had some neighboring districts who were being very selective in who they were screening. And again, as far as when we think about equity, they were not considering equity at all. In fact, they were looking at their ability to pay. So while it comes across as a negative right now because we can't work with our individual families that we want to make sure that we provide stability to, again, when you're legislating for a whole state, there were some actual benefits to that because, again, some districts were discriminating on reasons that I would not be okay with.
Thanks. Thank you for that. Okay, so does that give you enough guidance? Any further thoughts from other board members on their, you are on the, we've heard from a few of you, not all of you.
Can I just ask one other quick question?
Yeah, sure, Dr. Regan.
You releases out of Portland Public Schools, the proposed lottery date is April 15th. Approvals in is a month later on May 15th. Why?
A month in between. So I did provide target dates in there. We'll fine tune those dates based on what other districts are doing, because we don't, I just wanted to clarify that. I didn't put a slide up now for people who are observing and waiting for those dates, and we get calls every day just because we've still got to refine them. But we want to make sure that we've given people enough time to get through the application process.
Right.
And since you need your release before you can apply in, we need to give plenty of time for people to get those releases in other districts. We also want to provide the release as quickly as possible so people can go and do what they need to do elsewhere.
So the releases happen before the approvals.
But that's why I was asking why they wouldn't more or less happen at the same time.
Because you have to get one before you can do the other.
No. But
so we did them around the same time last year.
Right.
But what the problem was is that we were saying our approvals, we were saying yes to students in before they had been released out. So by saying this is release time, like by trying to enforce or develop a pattern of this is when you release. For the first month you release, for the second month you catch. It's like catch and release, only backwards.
So this isn't just Portland Public Schools. Is this like all the districts around us are kind of on the same schedule?
Getting there. So
Okay.
it's another
'Cause
one
that
of the
would make
things.
sense, right?
Yeah, it's another one of the recommendations that's coming out of that working group is that we have set time frames. By the way, they think we should be doing all of this in February. And we'll see if that makes good sense. But in the meantime, just the notion of spend this time helping families release. Everybody who's released now gets accepted. If you didn't get released, there's no point in applying to be accepted. And ideally, this is one form that starts with a family in one place, gets a district approval, moves to the other district electronically. It's not the family that has to walk it through, which has been the case. The form's available in multiple languages. By the way, the sample form that they've submitted, I asked today, I asked the state, I asked OSBA, do you have it translated? And of course, the answer was no, so we'll be doing that.
Great, thank you so much. Well, I support your recommendations, and I haven't heard anyone saying they're not comfortable with your recommendations, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
All right, appreciate that. So now we're going to move on to an important update around the work that's being done, as well as budget implications around our information technology strategic plan. I know we've been excited to hear about this for quite some time. We got a fabulous, huge information in our packet. I know we're going to hear a more streamlined version of that tonight, but just so folks know at home who are following along, in the board materials you'll see additional information, and it's great information. So, sorry, I'm jumping the gun on you, Carol. Go ahead and
That's okay.
Introduce the item.
As Ruth just introduced, to present that material will be Josh Klein, who's our Chief Information Officer, and Ryan Morales, who is our Director of Technical Operations. and they're going to present our strategic plan for information technology.
Welcome. Really glad to have you here. Now, it would be ironic if the PowerPoint didn't work, but I know it's going to.
Call tech support.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, I see. Thank you. All right, well, good evening, Superintendent Smith, Board of Directors. Josh Klein, Chief Information Officer. It's my pleasure to present the Information Technology Strategic Plan. I'm here with Ryan Whitten-Morales. I'll go ahead and get started. So we'll talk with you, do a quick introduction of the IT department. We have most of our IT leadership team here, so we'll introduce them quickly. We'll do a technology investment history. It's a brief history. And then a current state review that's going to include a peer review of Council of Great City Schools metrics. Look at that. And then a short video. It's a 3-minute video that I think you'll enjoy. And then we'll review a new asset management program that we've launched this year, which includes the results of our recent asset inventory, technology asset inventory. And then we'll finish with Ryan presenting a sustainable investment plan for your consideration. So if the IT leadership team could stand up just for a moment here, I'd like to introduce them quickly. So we have Marita Inglesby and Catherine Rawson from our Client Services Division. We have Ryan is here, Ryan Morales, and we have Stacy Parton, or Stacy Young now, actually, recently married, from our Technical Operations Division. And Niku Schreiner is holding down the fort in our Systems Development Integration Division, as our Program Director position is currently vacant.
Thank you so much for all being here.
So we'll go ahead and jump right into our investment history review. So it really started, information technology in the district really began in 1995 with a capital bond investment of about $49 million. It was a large investment at the time, part of a much larger bond, and this was about a quarter or a fifth of the bond was used to fund information technology in the district. What we did with that money is we ran power and data infrastructure to all of our schools. So we have historical buildings, old infrastructure. We didn't have enough power. We had no networking or data cabling at that time. So we ran that infrastructure out to the district schools during this period of time. We got all the schools internet access, and we installed computer labs in every school, 2 in many schools, high schools and middle schools, and we brought computers into every classroom, 3 to 4 computers per classroom. A few years later, or kind of during that same time, but a couple of years later, we had a Certificates of Participation initiative where $32 million was brought into technology. Mostly this was a software initiative, not a hardware initiative, so we brought in the eSys Student Information System and the PeopleSoft system at that time. Our more recent investment, or most recent investment, was a capital borrowing program in 2009, $15 million. You can see the breakout here of how those funds were intended to be used, as far as 85% for classroom technology. And we did a lot of good things. There was like 17 projects in this portfolio, but the main things are we brought the voice over IP phones to the district, so a new phone system. We upgraded computer labs in 12 schools. I think they were all K-8s at the time. We brought a wireless infrastructure into the district, which did not previously exist. And an important point of this is that the wireless infrastructure at that time was only sized for about 10 devices per classroom. So the access points are all in the hallways, not in the classrooms. So it needs to be updated. We brought in tech bundles sort of for the first time in an organized way to about half of our schools, and we modernized our data center for energy efficiency, cut our number of servers by a factor of down to 25% of what they previously were. So all that work created a maintenance obligation. So we brought in a lot of technology. We need to maintain that and keep it modern and keep it working. The final report of the bond initiative, which was the largest investment, recommended the need, or identified the need for a 3 to 5 year refresh cycle on school technology. That $3 to $5 million investment was recommended for a 3 to 5 year refresh period. Unfortunately, at that time, we only had about $1.5 million to invest toward that recommendation. And you'll see how that investment has sort of trended over time, but it stayed basically flat. A couple things were highlighted in that report, the need for expanded internet access, of course, to provide voice streaming media and other services, and then also sort of a prediction that internet bandwidth demand would increase or double every year, and I think we've pretty much seen that. So during this kind of period of time, this ending period after the borrow, after we had this $3.5 million recommendation, we did make $1.5 million investment per year, and that became called the IT Refresh Program. And so for the first 7 years of the Refresh Program, the money that we had, which was about $1 million on the school side, $500,000 on the central data center side, the $1 million was allocated to schools based strictly on their student enrollment. So there was no equity weighting, there was no other factor used, it was just strictly the number of kids. There was building level discretion on how those funds were spent. Principals did need to buy off our central menu through IT purchasing, so there were some standards, but principals could basically decide, how to invest those technology funds. Over the last 2 years, we've changed this approach a little bit, or pretty significantly actually, and we're now have launched what's called an Innovation and Modernization Fund, which is a centrally managed fund. So we're not distributing funds out to the schools. We're centrally managing the funds with an equity focus and aligning that with our district priorities. And because of that, we're able to realize some significant volume purchasing discounts and other efficiencies related to buying large volumes of stuff at one time instead of having a little bit bought here, a little bit bought here, a few weeks later, 20 Chromebooks here, 10 laptops here. We're buying thousands of devices at once. And we've also put around this district-wide asset management into place so we can track these devices much more effectively than we've done in the past. It allows us to target our strategic investments, and it's also all been done in the guidance of the PAPSA IT Steering Committee, the Portland Association of Public School Administrators. We have a steering committee we work with closely there around information technology, and they help us design this program. I don't spend much time here, but this does show you the trending of the $1.5 million, a little bit over $1 million at the school allocation level, and you can see that it as the economy dropped out, it went all the way down to $100,000 at the school level, and it's now just for the first year come back up to that $1.5 million level. And of course, this is all still well below the $3.5 million that was originally envisioned. So now we'll just jump right into the current state of technology. So I've got 3 charts here to share with you. These are all from the Council of Great City Schools, which, as you know, is the 67 largest districts in the country. These are our peers. This first chart, these are all from their ACT Point KPI management system. This first chart shows you the percent of spending of the total district budget on information technology. And what you see is Portland, trending up above the median there for a couple of years, up to 2.6%, and then the last couple of years falling down to about 2%, which is pretty much the median nationally. Leading districts are up above 3% investment in IT of their total budget. The next chart is IT spending per student. So again, we see a trending here. This is basically the amount per kid enrolled in the district. How much do we spend per student on technology? So it's a slightly different way of looking at it. What you see here is Portland leading pretty significantly other districts for a number of years, and then over the last couple of years, again, it falling off, and then us returning to the median at about the 185 per student level. The investments here, the other point I wanted to make was that the national trend really is increasing, even during a time of weak budgets and poor finances. The national trend still found a way to increase here just because of the world that we live in and how important technology is in our lives. And the last chart is average computer age. This is possibly the most disturbing trend, and you can see a real big drop off. It pretty much correlates with the time when we removed that funding. And now the computers we're managing in the district are at an average of 4.6 years old, and the national average is under 4 years. You do see a national trend increasing here, and that's because the quality of computer equipment has increased. It can last longer in many cases than it could years ago, but we're still concerningly above the average here as far as the age of our equipment. 2 takeaways. One is that our technology spending in the district has not kept pace with our student enrollment increases. So as we've had increases in student enrollment, we haven't made necessarily corresponding increases for those kids. And we're also not keeping pace with national trends to spend more on technology than was spent previously. The other important point is that using equipment beyond its useful life, so when equipment gets really old, it creates significant sunk costs to replace that equipment through a big periodic investment, which is a large disruptive process to come in and replace all this stuff. It's expensive, it's risky. None of that's probably surprising. So now we do have a quick video to show you, and then we'll kind of, move a little more upbeat here.
Digital literacy is no longer a nice to have, but absolutely necessary for students to be successful in today's world. We know that we have not been able to invest in so many elements of what makes a school successful, and that includes technology. We visited Madison High School. We looked at both of the computer labs that have computers that are more than 10 years old and watched a student try to log in, and sat and watched and watched.
So there's a lot of things that you can do with technology. So my biggest fear coming over here was if they had access, if teachers had access to give kids that opportunity. I think here, it's the technology certainly that we have right here, I cannot ask, it would be really challenging for some of our teachers to set up a time to come into the computer lab and be able to access that right away.
Finally.
It's our job at Portland Public Schools to make sure that we have the technology available for our students, starting at the very lowest grade level possible. The school board's allocation this year allowed us to address the most critical technology needs, and we were able to place a Chromebook cart in almost every elementary, K-8, and middle school. We've been operating on a basis of trying to get technology into our classrooms any way possible. So we do have some pockets where we have some great teachers doing wonderful things, and their students are able to take advantage of this.
It's been phenomenal. I mean, using the technology, especially with the hands-on learning that we have through Project Lead the Way and through our biomedical science program. Out, going all the way down. I can only imagine how much more the learning could happen in terms of the meaningful learning experiences and just the more student-centered activities that can happen in each of the classrooms here would benefit from having a cart.
Before we could put together a new funding model, we needed to know exactly what technology was in all of our schools. So for the very first time this year, we did a complete inventory of every piece of technology in every single Portland Public School. The lack of investment and the outdated technology in many of our schools now places our students at risk for not meeting today's digital literacy demands. There's a lot more to be done before all PPS students have access to the technology they need to succeed and to compete in today's global society. We're bringing forward a new equitable and sustainable plan and funding model to achieve this. Our students' future truly depends on it.
So that is kind of the transition into what we're working on this year and some of the good work and the modernization that's happening. So this slide is something that we've developed in concert with PAPSA IT, which I mentioned earlier. We've been working with them for a couple of years now to try to define some of our priorities and spend this central fund that we have. These are the 5 priorities that we developed with PAPSA in this order. Replacing projector bulbs, replacing lost and stolen equipment, maintaining a Chromebook for every teacher and administrator, and then moving down into student technology. So an 8-to-1 ratio of student technology, of students to devices in each school, and then down to a 5-to-1 ratio once we hit that 8-to-1 goal. And the 5-to-1 ratio would be achieved or focused on priority schools, academic priority schools first. So the asset inventory, going to give you some results here. We recently, as you know, ran a district-wide wall-to-wall asset inventory. TKW was our partner. TKW, Talbot, Corvola, Warwick is also the organization that we use for our financial audit. The scope of the inventory was 103 physical sites, and there's a list of the equipment here that was inventory, the types of equipment. I won't read that to you. And as was mentioned in the video, this is the first time that in the history of the district that we've had a complete inventory. While we were doing that inventory, we had a strike force, an IT strike force that came in behind the staff that were doing the inventory from TKW, and they were certifying devices for the Smarter Balanced Assessment. So in addition to counting and labeling every device, our IT team came in, talked with the principal and a point of contact at the school about which technology specifically was going to be used for testing, which labs, which exact pieces of equipment. We then tested every one of those pieces of equipment to make sure it was functional and would work for the test. And then we counted them. And then that count was used to establish a certified device count, which lets us do a lot of really powerful analysis between total technology in the school, technology available for student assessment. And you'll see that on the coming slide here. The school technology governance team within IT had oversight of this operation, the strike force operation, and we've developed remediation and e-waste plans for each school based on what we found. So where we found damaged or broken technology, we're either going to e-waste that or we're going to upgrade that so it can be useful. And those plans will be rolling out here in the next couple of weeks to principals. So the strike force results. What you see here, and this is much more detail in your packet, which you received, there's additional charts and data. But what you see here is a huge discrepancy in the district that we found as far as the amount of technology available for student assessment in the schools. So some schools being below a 1-to-1 student per device ratio, some schools being above 11-to-1, and then everywhere in between. The yellow schools in this are the high schools. You'll also see two horizontal lines, a yellow line, which is the 5-to-1 aspirational ratio, and then the red line is the 8-to-1 initial goal that we had.
Can I ask a quick question? On some of the schools that have more computers, is that because PTAs have paid for them, or do we know, are these just PPS purchased?
Why don't we hold off on questions if we could till?
It's a great question, and there's a variety of reasons, and we can, if you want, we can wait till the end. Okay, we're getting there. So with this information, with all of this information, we used this in real time to decide how to roll out the Chromebook carts that we had from the $1 million investment. So we ended up having 68 schools involved in our phase 1 Chromebook rollout project, 68 total schools, all K-5, K-8 middle schools, and MLC. Of those 68 schools, 56 of them received a Chromebook cart, 1 Chromebook cart. 4 schools received 2 Chromebook carts. 8 schools we determined already had sufficient technology, and we did not deploy a Chromebook cart to those sites. Phase 2, we received a $900,000 allocation in February, thank you. And we're going to be rebuilding labs and libraries at our high schools. So we haven't yet done the work in the high schools. That's coming up very quickly here. So here's the after graph. You saw the before. It was this one. Here's the after. So you can see, and with the exception of the high schools, which are the yellow, and we have not addressed those yet, we now have every school site below a 5-to-1 ratio for the purposes of student assessment. And of course, that also improves their overall device ratio in the school. So we were really happy that with this investment we were able to get down, not only to the 8-to-1 ratio, but down to the 5-to-1 aspirational ratio as well. So that's the end of what I have to share. You can move on to the next section. We'll do questions at the end.
Let's finish your whole presentation, and then I'll have lots of good questions.
Yeah, I think we have we have some components that'll address some of those questions as we go forward. Can you do that? I think if can we go back to the?
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. I'll just do that length. If there's something we can take away from this particular slide, it is the size of that word sustainability. That'll be a pretty consistent thread through the rest of this presentation. So, what are we really talking about here? We have an IT infrastructure that is very sizable, and it should be thought of as an ecosystem. We have devices in the hands of kids. We have all of that equipment, from that wireless network all the way out to the wider internet that we're considering in terms of maintenance. That infrastructure really needs to rapidly grow and be really well maintained. We're getting more and more devices in every classroom, some classrooms going fully to one-to-one. We have engaging new curriculum. Barely a couple of years ago, YouTube and Khan Academy were not tools in the classroom, and now they're tools in almost every classroom. We also have a reality that for our most historically underserved and at-risk kids, the school is potentially their primary access to technology and the internet. So we're actually supporting their ability to engage in the 21st century. We have some very large upcoming investment needs. That VoIP, the voice over IP phone environment that we created, is now reaching end of life, end of service. We've depended on that system for communication. We also depend on it for lockdown, emergency drills, fire, earthquake. So it's very important that that piece of our infrastructure remain well maintained. We also had a team this summer walk almost literally the four corners of every classroom in the district with devices that test wireless signal strength. We found significant number of areas that didn't have any wireless coverage at all. As Josh indicated, we built that network with the supposition in front of classroom instruction and about 10 devices per classroom. Now we're talking 30, 60 devices. The bandwidth in our classrooms has doubled, as was predicted, year over year over year. We are at capacity and, in all honesty, exceeding capacity in most of our sites. As you've seen in some of these prior slides, we also need a very sustainable plan for managing these staff and teaching tools and then student tools going forward. So we've been able to do some of this work before, as you saw in prior slides. We've had bonds, we've had capital borrowing. We feel that there's a bit of an issue with that funding model. Primarily, as to your question, Director Reagan, we perpetuated a digital divide. We have schools that, depending on which school you go to as a student, you have a vastly different experience in terms of access. We also, I think, recognize that this technology refresh is periodic itself, but it kind of needs to happen when it needs to happen. You can't ask a firewall or a piece of networking technology just to keep working for the kids. So at the end of the day, if we continue forward with periodic funding models like bonds, et cetera, if we're unable to pass those bonds or the cost of funds for a capital borrow are too significant, we run into a very significant problem being able to provide that baseline infrastructure. We also have found that bonds, grants, and capital borrowing packages create significant future obligations for maintenance and refresh. We do that one-to-one program at a high school. Those iPads only last so long. We need more internet access at those schools. So there's really a holistic perspective here that we need to bring to the table. What we're proposing, we're basically calling a stable operating model. There are three really key points to this. We need to use simple industry standard supply strategies. We need to create a predictable and supported spend for all of you so that when we look at budgeting, you understand and can predict what's coming out of IT. We also need to use operating ratios to plan for our capacity. So as we move, grow, and change as a district, we also need to fund that process. In order to support that stable operating model, we're proposing a technology leasing portfolio. It's a bit of a scary number, but we have about $30 million worth of infrastructure work to do. We also, under this portfolio, plan to operationalize information technology. Again, we'll know what our predicted spend is. It'll be aligned directly to the operation of the district, directly aligned to the implementation of programs and the devices and needs in kids' hands. This also is something that you'll see is kind of an industry best practice. And in terms of industry here, I'm speaking both to IT and to education. One of the primary drivers is that it lowers total costs of funds. The large, planful refresh strategies have significant volume purchasing opportunities behind them. We can get devices almost at cost. And the cost of funds itself, because of the way that taxable leases work, is significantly reduced over other funding vehicles. At the end of the day, how does this really support a school? Well, what we'd like to see this do is create a commitment to a healthy, predictable, scalable technology platform at schools. We have modern curriculum rolling out that has significant digital components to it. We have the Khan Academy thing. We have folks really using these tools every day in instruction. That needs to be treated like a platform that they can build upon. And the district's dollar is going to go further. At the end of the day, you have consolidated budgets that are buying laptops and student equipment for teachers, one-offs, 5 laptops here. If we're planful, if we're predictable in the way that we're doing this work, that dollar goes significantly further. We also have an opportunity here to become partners with the schools, between central office and those schools. We have large adoptions on the forefront. We needed some strong asset management life cycle. That's part of what work we've already done and work that will continue under this model. There's also an important bullet there around changes in FTE and enrollment. This last fall, we added well over 300 or so positions out in schools in various capacities. The unfortunate reality is no funding was provided to give that staff member a device, so a piece of technology, or those new classrooms that were being opened again for the first time, any presentation equipment whatsoever. So part of what this model addresses is being predictable about those sorts of changes and being able to partner with that principal. So instead of pulling those funds out of their consolidated budget that may have gone to, let's say, art supplies, we can provide the tools that they need day one. So when I said this was an industry-aligned approach, you'll see some peers that we have up there in the educational space, both K-12 and universities, including Tucson Unified School District, who have already moved to this type of a model. Surprisingly enough, we, Portland Public Schools, have already moved to this model with our RICO copier fleet. So that is a very large, multi-million-dollar equipment fleet that is managed on a 5-year cycle lease and was actually refreshed, I think, about 2 years ago. So what we're asking to drive this portfolio forward is an initial $2 million ongoing commitment, and this is in the fiscal budget that we have proposed. This would service an initial $10 million worth of work in that portfolio. We're going to be focusing, we would propose to focus the majority of that work in remediation of our network and connectivity issues, as well as some of the biggest pain points in student and staff devices. We would be looking to increase that portfolio in a ramp over 5 years to approximately $30 million. You'll notice that aligns very clearly with the overall infrastructure portfolio. That's an important concept to kind of have, as we would scale that portfolio to match the total cost of ownership to the district. So as we add programs, as we add staff, as we deploy more one-to-one initiatives, we'll need to consider where that ceiling really is. The service of that full $30 million portfolio looks like about $6 million in an ongoing year-over-year commitment. You understand that these are very rough numbers, not factoring in total cost of funds, things of that nature. We've been building this strategy out with a strong partnership with the Office of the CFO, Yosef Awad, formerly of Tucson Unified School District, who has already implemented a program very similar to this for staff and student devices. So we have a graph here representing time from left to right, indicating periodic investment. So you'll see we passed a bond, very significant investment in technology. There was some time it passed. We went to those certificates of participation, some more time passes. We begin to start trying to refresh some of that technology. We put a little capital into the game, and then we move back down to just that refresh level. It was about 1.5 of the suggested 3.5. That dashed line represents next year. So if we are successful in moving forward the budget proposal that we've made, the next 10 years would look like what you see to the right of that line. A very stable, sustainable, and predictable model in terms of cost of funds and in terms of the equipment that's in our district.
So the next steps, this is our last slide. So we're going to continue with coordination with Yosef and the CFO in portfolio design and procurement. I'm still investigating that. We'll be finalizing our master lease agreement terms and preparing to move forward with that. Looking for approval of the ongoing investment in our innovation and modernization budget, beginning with next school year. Ryan mentioned that we had requested $2 million. Hopefully we'll get some or all of that. And continuing with the development of a refresh calendar, which basically starts to lay out, and there's actually a kind of an early version of this in your board packet, which starts to lay out when different equipment needs to be refreshed and when we might expect to be leasing that equipment. So that is the end of our presentation, and we'd be happy to take questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, colleagues. No one has any? Director Buell.
how did we get to the before where we're so out of kilter? Have you guys been around long enough to understand how we got there? In one slide, I noticed that, I think it was Cleveland, Wilson, Lincoln, and Grant all were up at the top with technology, and Madison.
Actually, it's the higher the bar, the worse it is, right?
Right.
More kids per device.
Higher the bar, the worse?
Yeah.
On the, same on the strike force result?
That's true.
Yeah. You want more devices
So
per
Jefferson
student.
and Benson are at the top.
Yeah, that means there's like 11 kids sharing one device, as
Okay.
opposed to one kid having their own device.
Good. So how do we get out of kilter then?
You know, I wasn't here, but anecdotally, I think there's a lot of reasons. You know, some of it is based on the community the school is in and the donations they can receive from their PTA and other local groups. It has to do with donations they can receive through Donors Choose and other sources, grants they might receive. School improvement grants sometimes are used to fund technology. Equity funds that come through, you know, All Hands Raised. I think principals have had discretion on how those funds are used, and some principals have used those for technology where others haven't. So I think, in addition to us, you know, moving kids around and reconfiguring schools and equipment moving with it, I think just the variety of different things that have happened without anybody really counting these pieces of equipment and paying attention to it just all contributed to this situation.
And as you have pointed out, a huge part of that is the lack of economy of scale. If a principal is buying one or two, you know, I think back to, you know, PTA raising for a smart board, single smart board versus having a strategic overall plan for the district. But yeah, again, just to emphasize for folks who are looking at that chart, the higher bar you're worse off if you're a higher bar there because you have more kids sharing the devices. But what you're showing is that huge, just the variability.
Yes.
So what are we making decisions on to buy new technology? What are the factors we're making decisions on? In other words, how do we decide who gets the new technology now, going forward?
So the
We're going
program
to buy new technology, and as it comes in, how do we decide where it goes?
You know,
What are the factors that we're making that decision on?
It's a great question. It's a complex answer. We've begun to develop what we call technology refresh bands, and you kind of saw them in the document that's in your packet. So we have different bands of equipment that we're looking at as discrete, and each one of those we would consider individually. So it'd be great if we could get to a place where we replace an entire band all at once through the district. So when administrators get to their point in time where their Chromebooks are no longer useful, we give everybody a new Chromebook at the same time. When their Chromebooks become no longer useful, we give everybody one at the same time. Student technology is a little more complicated, and you saw the model we used this year where we actually looked at the testing ratio. It's going to kind of vary by band, and we'll be looking to PAPSA IT to partner with us and other stakeholder groups to partner with us to decide the best way to approach each of those bands.
And is there a difference, are you taking into account the difference for education versus testing devices? I mean, how are we adjusting that? And you can give a lot of testing devices out there, but it may not be the best decision educationally.
Absolutely.
How are we factoring that in?
Yeah, it's not the best way to measure it, certainly, and mostly because of this being the first year of Smarter Balanced is why we ended up in that situation. But one limitation of what we've done so far is we don't know who the devices are assigned to, and we don't know the age of each device. There's more work we need to do to calculate that stuff and to record that into an inventory management system. So so one of the charts that's in your packet is the total amount of technology in a school compared to the total number of kids in the school. But we don't know of that technology which pieces are assigned to staff, which are available for student use, which are located in a classroom that's only used for one specific biomedical course. So there's a lot more work we have to do to understand the differences between these graphs and why some schools have a huge amount of technology but can only make a small amount of it available for testing. And in fact, that may be a very good thing because that means they're integrating the technology into their instruction in such a powerful way that they can't be without it for testing. So there's a lot of work to do around what you're asking.
Is that what you're working with the PAPSA group
True.
over? In other words, are we getting actual information from principals that are saying, yeah, this is what we feel we need, and then we're taking that into account? Or this move to centralize, not taking that into account any longer? How does that play out?
We, we're working with PAPSA, which is a representative group of all the principals, on
Right.
some of the strategic pieces. As far as working with individual principals on what they need, an example of that is on this high school initiative that you recently funded. We're going to be working with each individual principal at the high school to determine what they think they need at their school.
At the high school?
At each of those high schools,
What
because each
about
one has
the
different programming.
Middle school, elementary schools, are we working with those individual principals?
It's important to recognize our IT strike team that we had out in the field working with that whole K middle band was working directly with the principal's designee to identify all devices for instruction and assessment. So the data that we brought back had all the instructional labs, all the assessment labs, and then as we rolled out those Chromebook carts, those are also available for instruction. So there's really been kind of this focus on, as Josh is pointing out, there's an interesting piece of data here around the technology density in the school and what that means in the classroom versus group instruction versus items that are like a general use computing lab.
The other thing I would add to that is I think this is going to deepen. Our partnership with the schools is going to deepen, and with the principals at the schools is going to get deeper as the years
Kind of
come.
ongoing, the questions I'm asked are a little down the line, maybe.
Yeah, it is. This is going to take many years to get a real program in place to do this. But I mean, this year,
Year and a half.
they didn't even actually believe that we were going to deliver this equipment. I mean, so the trust has been broken to such a large degree that they didn't actually believe we would follow through with this. So this is just kind of the very beginning of reestablishing this working relationship.
I have more questions, but go ahead and let somebody else ask.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Director Curler?
Thank you.
So, what are the downsides of the lease paradigm framework?
The largest downside is that you would establish an ongoing budget for information technology, which means you'd be committing, and then we would enter into lease agreements that were long agreements, so you'd be committing future boards to maintaining that level of funding for technology.
You can see there's a downside.
Just like when we open a school, we commit boards to maintain those schools over the years. It's another maintenance issue.
Exactly,
correct?
it's operationalizing the idea.
And facilities has an ongoing maintenance budget. It's not adequate, obviously, but they do have an ongoing maintenance
We're
budget.
well aware of that one.
So we're basically asking for a similar budget.
Do you have more?
So-
Director Knowles?
So I'm not a numbers person, you guys, so just bear with me here for a minute. So when I'm looking at the funding proposal page, it's in our packet. Beginning in 15-16, a crest of $2 million annually, creating a portfolio of the first $10 million. That's for the lease, correct?
Right, so if we assume we'd lease the stuff for 5 years, that's how you get from 2 to 10.
Okay. And then an additional 6, and when would that come in? The next year? In 16-17?
So I think you want to answer that.
Sure. Essentially, what we're planning is a ramp approach. It would be very difficult for us to do $30 million worth of
Yes,
work
of
in a
course.
single year. So the idea being, let's get some of the big ticket items out of the way initially, and you might see budgetary ask increasing by $1 million in the next fiscal year, and then $1.5 million ongoing thereafter. That's part of the idea of crafting this in coordination with the Office of the CFO to really understand, what we can kind of tolerate in terms of ramping that up as all of our other programs are also recovering, but to really have an eye on putting our entire infrastructure portfolio into this model so that you've got a really clear alignment between the total cost of ownership and how we're funding it.
It sounds similar to our bonds, where we're talking about layering the bonds, one on top of the other as we go forward. Is that a pretty good?
I think that's a fair
Yes.
analogy.
Okay. All right, so in the end, not this year, but not in 15-16, but in 16-17, you'd be looking at $8 million.
You'd
Is
be
that
looking
right?
at, so 16, 17, you'd
Each
be
year.
looking at maybe 3. which could probably support about another 5.
I think what they mean is that we're going to start with 2
Or
million.
starting with 2.
And we're getting to 10, but starting the year after next year, they would
do
gradually
6 on
increase
top of
up
that.
to 6 in future years, not immediately.
Gradually increased up to 6.
So remember they had the little
Okay,
chart that
thank
showed
you.
us going up and then stabilizing.
Yeah, I saw that, but I'm.
At this point, we're not
this is
thinking we
real
need
accurate.
more than 6. You know, if $30 million is our total valuation of
Right.
stuff, we're not thinking we need more than 6 to maintain that equipment.
Forever.
Right.
And ever.
Until we grow. If we grow more, then we need more.
Right.
Exactly.
And as a district, as we shrink, you know, if there are situations where, you know, equipment's becoming cheaper, or there are significant changes in technology, or a program shift and change, it gives us a little bit of flexibility. If with some of those devices, you're not really talking about a 5-year, you're talking more about a 3-year obligation.
Yeah.
I guess that would
Well, I
be a
have to-
follow-up to Director Curlow's then, so we're not getting ourselves locked into a technology that might become obsolete, it would still be, so, okay, so we're
Correct.
not going to be getting into that kind of agreement.
So just generally, I would say, I'm so happy to see you guys come forward with this, because it's been pretty apparent over the years. I think my kids started school in '91, so I've watched this, including the bond in 1995, where, you know, where I first met Bobby, when we worked on that bond together. But so, and it's never had any kind of organization to what we've rolled out, and so I'm just really happy to see that you're thinking about how we're rolling this out, but also that you're thinking about the maintenance side of it, because that's so important. So thank you very much for the presentation, and I like what you're doing.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Director Bilal.
Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for setting us or offering us a path to be sustainable and thoughtful in this. I'm just going to note to our earlier discussion about arts, I would hope that we would have a similar type plan, a path of here's how you would move through it. I know it took a lot of investment on our part on this front end to inventory all of our materials, and when we talk about our inventory, so now we have a set inventory, there's still things we don't know about some of our machines or devices. We'll get to that, hopefully. But there's still going to be this outstanding, right? Teachers are really creative in what they use and what they need, and as a big institution, it's not always, we're not able to be as nimble, partly because of our limited investment. So they're gonna go to Donors Choose, they're gonna go to PTAs, our great partners, they're gonna go to a lot of folks and say, hey, you know, I have this really great idea for this project, can somebody fund this? Have we talked at all about how do we onboard those devices, or how do we make sure they're standard? And or again, I'll point out that some of the disparity, what I heard was described as some of the reasons is because some PTAs could fund it, some couldn't, and I know I can remember when I visited Forest Park, they have a great partner. They have a parent there who has a connection to technology, and every couple of years, they get a refresh of some sort, or every year they get a refresh of a certain amount. And some of our communities don't have that access. And so, again, how do we bring parity to that piece?
It's probably better for you to speak to it. I guess where I would start is we have some procedures when there is a donation that we ask schools to follow to make us aware of that equipment. It hasn't been well enforced or well communicated, so as part of our new asset management program, we're going to be partnering with schools in a different way to make sure that these things happen and we understand and we can help support that equipment and refresh it as it's onboarded.
Certainly, I don't think we would ever plan to be adversarial to that process. I think it's an incredible expression of the commitment that the communities have into their schools. We can be a partner in that, though. Part of the way that we've already exercised that is having some conversations with PTAs and with interested parents. One at Bridal Miles leaves me voicemails quite frequently to talk about how they can be a part of making this investment. So, what is your purchasing standard? What's the right thing to buy? Can we buy off your contracts? Another example around Donors Choose, Nika Schreiner, who we mentioned earlier, has reached out to that organization to start building a partnership with them to help them understand what we're trying to achieve. So potentially, as Donors Choose moves forward, they're a part of this process. We also know, there's just a reality that things are going to come into the building that didn't come in through these channels. So as part of our asset management program, we've created essentially policy that no building will go without an asset inventory for greater than 3 years. So we did this one initial big shot, 103 sites. We plan at least a third of the district, and we're kind of still working on the numbers there, gets an audit refresh every 3 years. So we'll go out there, we'll take a look, we'll find those new pieces of equipment, we'll bring them into the fold, not necessarily in terms of controlling them, but if that PTA is donating that Chromebook card, we want to be able to help make sure that that stays a viable tool in the schools. So we'd like to be able to replace those broken screens. Or if they're not able to donate that Chromebook card in the future and it is reaching that end of life, maybe we're coming in and ensuring that that device ratio stays stable. That's kind of the big picture of how we respond to that.
Great, thank you. And as I, again, heard you talk about, I appreciate looking at equity, and it seems in some of those slides that we've done a pretty good job of trying to offset, again, some of the schools that had the higher bars, which means a worse ratio to device, were some of our more affluent schools, some of our higher socioeconomic schools. At the same time, I know that some of those schools, as I talk to families, get really frustrated because as we go through our refresh, by the time we get to the end of our refresh, or we never get to the end of our refresh before the beginning needs to be refreshed again. And so those schools, again, I think of schools who have just made it a priority, right? So if I'm a building and I prioritize technology, I'm going to keep investing in technology, and then some school that doesn't keeps getting refreshed by the district because their stuff keeps going in and out. How do we, it's similar to an arts question before, right? If I don't fund arts, will eventually the district get really mad and just tell me I have to fund arts and give me additional money for it?
So the way we envision these leasing schedules working is there's a master schedule, and then there's multiple individual schedules underneath it. And then we would be responsible for managing these schedules as they fall off and on. So when we buy a fleet of Chromebooks for a set of schools, at the end of that 3-year period, which we determine as the life cycle of a Chromebook, then all of those Chromebooks just get replaced. So it's just built into the process. They all get reclaimed. They're given back to the organization we purchased them from, and then they do something with them. They have a way of making some money off of that old technology in a way that we don't, which is why we can get such a good deal on these things. But one of the core pieces of this sustainable plan is that at the end, you just get new stuff, and it's guaranteed because it's built into the contractual relationship as part of the lease.
Great. I just have 2 more questions.
Yeah,
Is that okay?
I know we're about a half hour behind,
Yeah.
so we do want to wrap up with our remaining questions.
The first question is, when you gave us the 5-to-1 ratio for certified devices for testing, you were only using the population in that school that would be tested, is that correct? So at a K-5, you're only looking for grades 3-5 population, is that correct?
That's true. So that the numerator was the number of students in testing grades, and the denominator was the number of devices that were certified for testing, which did not include tablet devices.
So a school looking at that might feel like there's a disconnect, but it's not because it's their whole population. It was certified for testing.
That's
and my
correct.
final question, or actually an offer, as we look for sustainable funding, I was just reading that there is new legislation going through the state legislature to work with possibly new technology companies for data centers and fiber optics and high-speed internet, that looking to give them tax breaks, which of course could reduce the revenue coming into the state for funding for education. I just wonder if there's an opportunity to work with those same companies to see if there couldn't be some sort of utility rate that does actually provide this refresh, perhaps statewide or at least in certain metropolitan areas. Just a thought.
Interesting.
Director Regan.
So one of the things I wanted to mention, I was at the Lincoln auction recently, and it was kind of remarkable. Some students came up to the podium and basically did a paddle raise, but it was around the fact that they had been watching many of the higher poverty kids at the school were doing all of their papers, they noticed, on phones because they had no computer technology. And so what they actually did was a paddle raise to buy Chromebooks for individual students so that they would, when they come in so the money raised this year would be for kids coming in freshman year, high poverty kids, would be given a Chromebook with the understanding that it would be theirs for 4 years. and then by then it would probably be out of date, but it would just be given to the students, which is different, I think, than what you're talking about in terms of this here, where you're purchasing computers for the school specifically and for school-based work, right? So that's that, to me, it was a really creative thing. I actually said to them as we're going through the budget process, it would be great for you to share that with us if other communities had any capacity to be doing that. And I even suggested they talk with you about it also, and you're probably pretty familiar with it. But that was a really creative way that students were stepping up to help other students. So kind of exciting. I had a question, I think, following up on Director Knowles about what your actual budget request is for next year, for our budget cycle. So it sounds to me like you're going to be requesting $2 million during the budget cycle. And is that in addition to what your current budget is, or when you are requesting this, are there some economies that we'll be gaining by leasing? For example, when you lease a car, they typically take care of the maintenance. So what is your actual ask?
So in this current school year, we had $1 million available for school technology in our innovation and modernization program. That $1 million was provided to IT as a one-time investment. So our ask is actually $2 million, and not just, because it was a one-time investment and not ongoing, we had to ask for a full $2 million, which is what we need, instead of asking for just $1 million on top of what we had.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes sense.
But the $2 million is $2 million more than what your current budget is. This is
It's only $1 million more than our current budget
because
we
of the
had
one-time.
$1 million as
But
the
it would be
one-time.
$2 million ongoing.
Yes, it would be $2 million ongoing, which it
On
hasn't
top
been.
of.
To be built on in future years is
Yes.
sort of the
Okay.
understanding.
And so my question was, in terms of a lease rather than purchase, my assumption is that whoever we're leasing them from would be doing more of the maintenance of the computers, and will we see any cost efficiencies there?
I think we'll definitely see some efficiencies. There's a lot of work to still do around those terms, but what I would probably do is relate it to our copier arrangement, where when there's an issue with the copier, the school secretary or the staff of the school can contact the provider directly instead of contacting IT. So I think that's the type of arrangement we'd be looking to enter into, where there's a warranty that is provided as for the full life of the lease. The device is warranted, so if it fails, it's just a phone call, a new one gets shipped out. IT is not even necessarily involved, and it's all just tracked in the system.
There are some significant economies there around not maintaining 5 to 7-year-old technology.
Right.
And we've had technicians out spending hundreds of hours just doing CPR on this equipment, trying to keep it up and running. You saw that 11-minute boot up time. That was kind of the best we can do with quite a few computers, and we touched all of those computers, adding enough RAM just to get them onto Windows 7 this summer. So you think about, we get to a point where our technology is healthy and sustainable. You're not spending all of that time being reactive.
Right. Okay. Director Buell.
There was a reason Bill Gates spent $200 million for a Common Core, since we're buying all this technology all the way across the country. Millions and millions, way over 200 million, I guess. What about are we taking into account that computer labs and classes and stuff? And for instance, Wilson has a computer science class, the only one in the district maybe. Computer science, 4 years, solid stuff, they need new equipment for that. Is there something that takes that into account? Or I was at a school that didn't have it, that had 2 computer labs, and another school that had no computer lab. Are we building that in some way educationally, the educational provisions?
Yeah, so that was definitely taken into account. We have some ratios we ran that were total devices, regardless of their use or availability. And then we had this other ratio that was just devices available for testing. So if there was a classroom full of computers, where those computers were used every period of the day for instruction, then the principal would have told us, this room is not available for testing because we need this for instruction, and we did not include that in the ratio.
And to your question about just kind of the scope of this, the CT programs, really any technology that's district owned, that's in a school is going to be in a refresh band and will be under one of those leasing schedules and will be refreshed as appropriate. So, you know, you have some of those programs that require a little bit higher end. You know, Chromebook isn't necessarily going to support, you know, computer science instruction. So there's pieces of that in cooperation with PAPSA, and I think we're going to learn a lot as we do the refresh of the high school labs around what those spaces look like and what their needs are long term.
So principals actually said, we need this computer lab and you can't have it for testing, and then we send them new stuff? I would have thought every principal would have done that with their computer lab, because all the computer labs are used for instruction, but not for computer lab classes maybe? I don't know. Anyhow, that's beside the point. Last question I have is, are we just blowing off this concerns about wireless and kindergarten kids and first graders? Are we still not looking at that? Last time you were here, you said we weren't looking at that. We're just, I mean, this now worldwide concern about this. Are we thinking, are we minimizing the wireless or anything with small kids, or are we doing anything around that?
We're not doing anything around that at this time.
Thank you, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So before we wrap up, I just want to say thank you to the superintendent for her leadership, and to our staff, and to our partners. I mean, tonight we've seen two amazing reports and about really a transformation in our district for two key areas, arts and IT, that has been needed and coming for a long time. So it's just so, I just can't tell you how exciting it is as I kind of head into the sunset here. Just to see the district turning itself around on these pieces and heading toward a sustainable future and a plan. And yes, we're urgent, like how are we going to do this, and where are the gaps, and let's fill the gaps. And I'm confident that my colleagues here and future colleagues will keep making sure that we're looking at those equity pieces and that the sustainability. But I'm just thrilled, and I just really want to thank you, Superintendent Smith, and thank the legislature, because again, it's when you have an increased amount of funding that we're able to begin to build back. And we are at the beginning stages. You guys, I know, are working your tails off, as the Arts TOSA and her folks. So, again, this is, if there are any legislators listening, this is what we can begin to do if we start to reinvest in our schools. So I know you're working really hard, and I've been looking for this for a long time, and I'm just thrilled. So thank you so much. Keep up the great work, and let's keep going.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
All right, so next item on the agenda is a discussion around authorization for bond issuance. Superintendent Smith, can you introduce this item?
Yes, so David Wind, our Deputy Chief Financial Officer, will provide the report on authorization for our next bond issuance.
Coach Atkins, board members, Superintendent Smith, I feel very inadequate. I have no singers, I have no PowerPoint, I have no video. I tried to recruit some senior staff to sing a cappella, but you'll be glad to know that they said no. I have heard from Mrs. Bailey, though. She's happy to report that Bill has indeed come home.
I see him right there in the back.
Now, that's not Bill.
Yeah.
That's Bill's brother. So, and I'm not asking for money. I'm actually offering to find some for you. So in November 2012, our voters gave us authorization to issue up to $482 million of capital bonds, and we're very grateful to the community for their support. That campaign included a target tax rate of no more than $1 per thousand of assessed value. In May 2013, we actually issued our first bonds, almost $145 million face value of bonds, and we've started to repay those. I'm happy to report that in the first 2 years, the tax rate on those bonds was less than $1.09 per thousand, so we have lived up to that campaign commitment. It's time for us to issue some more bonds. We are proposing to issue up to $275 million of bonds. The numbers that you saw in your packet have a target of about $245 million. The exact amount and the exact terms will be determined at sale, which is targeted towards the end of April if you authorize it. There's really three criteria we use to figure out how much to issue this time. We're limited to $482 million in total. We're limited to that target interest, that target tax rate of no more than $1.10 a thousand. And the third constraint is that we have to have a reasonable expectation of spending 85% of the money within 3 years. So when we ran those numbers and worked with our financial advisors, we came up with the numbers that you saw in your packet.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions, comments from board members? Seeing none? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, so next on the agenda is a discussion around a draft resolution that I brought forward around the Smarter Balance assessment. And again, this is very much a draft, so we're going to vote on this, I hope, at our next meeting on March 9th. But wanted to take some time in tonight's agenda to have board members just kind of give some high-level feedback. I've already gotten some. I also had a great conversation with Gwen Sullivan from the Portland Association of Teachers this afternoon. Got some great input from her. We heard from Suzanne Cohen. Certainly anyone listening tonight who wishes to weigh in quickly. I mean, I think the time is important for us to act on this. And I'm bringing this forward because, as we know, we did a resolution last July around the Smarter Balanced as we were sort of heading in toward the first year of implementation. And now as the state is poised to roll it out across the state, I felt it was important for us as a board and the largest district in the state to weigh in again. Again, this is very much a draft, totally open to input and changes to this. But some of the pieces I felt it was important for us to talk about in this resolution and give some direction and feedback both to staff and to the state and the federal government is at this moment we've gotten the, A, we're about to roll it out. B, it's important to update, I think, just sort of memorialize the work that has been done because we called out concerns last year about technology availability and so forth, the work that has been done to prepare for this. We've heard a number of concerns and testimony and other input around the opting out piece, so where's the board on that? Seemed important to weigh in. Really want to weigh in as we have the state work group that we heard about, I think last week, who has a vision around reducing the role of standardized testing, not using the first year of results for any punitive labeling, which is exactly what we asked for last summer. So I felt it was important that we recognize that and support that vision that's in a draft state right now. It's a time for us to weigh in on that. As well as the work of our assessment work group here at the district that we heard from last week. This is an important moment for us to support and encourage them. And I also just heard from Gwen Sullivan this afternoon some exciting possibilities around at the federal level of also de-emphasizing standardized testing. And so that would be another way that we could support that through this resolution, as well as ask, direct staff to get the word out to parents about that so they can share with their congressional delegation there. So those are kind of the pieces that are in here. And tonight we're not going to spend a ton of time, we're not going to spend, I hope, any time with super detailed wordsmithing, but I would definitely want to hear just kind of high level what's missing, what couldn't, what do you support, what don't you support. And I'm going to ask the staff to kind of help me. I'm going to take notes as best I can. If you all can take notes of the input that you hear, and then we'll work with Co-Chair Knowles and staff to kind of collate what we heard tonight, come back with a final version for your consideration next week. Okay? So that's basically, so I'd love to hear from each of you. Any thoughts, kind of where you're at on this? Maybe start with Director Curler.
Well, as I understood, when we listened to the assessment group the other day, they weren't taking on the statewide test. And I don't quite understand why that was.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Well, why wouldn't we have our group of educators who are looking at assessment deal with that and give us recommendations?
So the assessment committee, the charge of the assessment committee was really to look at the district overall and do an inventory of all of the assessments. So this would be one of them, but part of what we wanted to separate is we didn't want we've asked them to develop a philosophy about how we use assessment, how much we assess, what do we get from each assessment, and working with Rick Stiggins on how we do that in a way that we're getting the value, the educational value from the assessing. Smarter Balance would be one of those. What we didn't want to do last time is have the whole dialogue revert to Smarter Balance, so we wanted to deal with that unto itself and then let the assessment committee do their broader.
But so they are addressing the Smarter Balance?
It'll be one of the things they're looking at. It's because it's one of the assessments we do. Yeah.
So we could.
But it's not their sole focus.
Yeah. I think that's a helpful clarification. So we could put something in there to clarify. I think there's something in here about looking forward to, thanking them and looking forward to the report, but we could be more specific that we're interested in we don't want to hear back about the whole
We
spectrum.
didn't want that committee to end up having their sole focus be
Right.
smarter balance. It would suck them into one thing and lose the overall perspective.
Yeah,
So.
no, that makes sense. Okay.
And then I thought I heard Rick Stiggins say at this meeting the other day here, that the SBAC test has a long, long way to go before it passes his muster for a decent test. And so then I guess where my head is we've hired an expert to tell us what to do, and he's saying this test isn't all that great. And so it's like, okay, and I think the state gets it too. But so why don't we just have the experts work on it until it passes its test, and until then, let's not even screw around with it. That's where my head's at.
Okay. So you're suggesting that the district should refuse to participate at all until it's been, oh, and I should just point out, I think Dr. Stiggins is a volunteer. Both at,
He's a volunteer.
He's a volunteer.
He's a volunteer.
Yeah, but anyway.
Or there might, like, for instance, other countries do sampling. You know, there's a lot.
I think that's what Gwen was saying, actually the federal government is looking at, potentially moving toward a sampling approach.
Yeah.
So that's why I'd like to incorporate that. It's not in this draft. I'd like to incorporate the federal piece in here too, and our support for that, or something, you know, moving in that direction. Okay, so, great. Pam, any thoughts?
So I've just worked with you all along on this, and I think that it's fine just the way it is. So that's my comment.
Ooh. Yeah, and I hope I made it clear that this isn't just my work, it's many people's work. Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, let me also say thank you very much for because this is a lot of your work, and also to staff for the work that they did.
Yeah, because I had an outline and they made it. So, thank you. So Director Blau.
Just some quick thoughts. I don't necessarily think 8 hours is too long for a cumulative assessment. I think that some of the information we ask from our staff about costs and validity and reliability and all that are really the responsibility of either the state, we should be asking the state for it, or our statewide association.
So wait, I thought we were asking the state for that.
Well, Resolved 1D says provide a report.
But that calls on the state of Oregon.
I'm sorry, yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to create additional work
right.
for our staff, and this is the state's responsibility because it's their test.
And I think that we could also ask our state association, the School Boards Association. I think they should be able to go across multiple districts.
Okay.
Again, my big advocacy is to remove the high stakes around it.
Right.
I think that any test, when it rolls out, there's a time of adjustment and period and understanding of what it is. And I appreciate Director Buell. I think I saw in a communication of yours that by definition these are testing whether or not you know the Common Core state standards. And so if you're actually teaching the test, you're teaching the Common Core state standards. And I think that matchup for the first time in the state is actually a good thing, that they're actually testing for what they're setting the standards. So I don't think it's necessarily...
Few problems there.
I understand your problems with it. And I guess part of what I'm looking at is that it is really about a shift, and we're testing how people are thinking and interacting with the work rather than what I would say the lower level skills of necessarily reading, and not lower level in that they're foundational. But those assessments are typically administered by teachers in the classroom or districts, and so it seems like the right level for the state level. So those are just my comments.
Great, thanks. Director Regan.
I am discovering that I left behind all of my notes at home on this because I had looked at
Feel free
I had looked at
share
Director
them
Buell's
with me not later tonight,
yeah,
but tomorrow.
Director Buell's information, and I had looked at your information that we had been looking at. But I guess one of the things that I was thinking as I went along reading this at home was that it felt like this, much of this resolution kind of reiterated what we had already done in July, which was a really good positive resolution. And so I was wondering if we could take this down to kind of the core things we're trying to communicate right now, rather than having it be kind of the reiteration, because again, we did that, it was powerful. And so if you look at, what are the core messages that we want to get across at this time, it might be worthwhile for us to have that discussion. What are the top 3 things that we want to do? I mean, one thing I think we want to do is acknowledge and thank the state for the position they've taken since our resolution, which is we're not going to be, using this in any kind of punitive way.
I think it's a recommendation.
Yeah,
and I think
all
their
the more
vision,
reason to step in right now.
what
and
Gwen was
say,
talking about.
Yeah,
and the vision is just a draft, so we really want to, I think that to me is one of the
To
key
me,
pieces.
that's like the most important thing that we can say. But I guess I'm worried that with a resolution this long, that would get lost.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I would almost rather have a short resolution that's really to the point of,
I'm thinking maybe we remove the bullets that kind of recap, like you're saying, and just because we
take
do
it
want
down
to
to the
sort of
core.
have the history for folks who come to this in later years, that there was an initial resolution and this is a follow-up. But I like the idea of shortening where we can, so we'll look at that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just refer them back to that, so.
Yeah.
And I think that, we could go through this and kind of figure out what are the 2 or 3 core messages that we want to really deliver
Well,
at this point in time.
We're supporting the vision for the state, both not using it for least, I think the recommendation is only around the first year, but that's a
Right,
start, I
well, at
guess.
least.
But then the bigger piece is that vision around reducing the role of standardized testing.
Yes,
which is
and I
in the
think,
draft version of the state.
I think that there is some recognition that, 7, 8, 8.5 hours of testing is an unreasonable amount of time. So I think reiterating that, again, that conversation is happening.
Did you say reasonable or unreasonable?
Unreasonable amount of time. So that might be, an area for us to kind of zero in. I know that we had included something in here about families who are looking at opting out.
Right.
And I don't know if we could put something in here saying that, this is basically a parent decision to opt out. I mean, we really don't encourage or not, discourage. I mean, it's really more of a parent decision. But at the same time, our schools end up getting sanctioned, more or less. So I don't know if there's something we can be saying about that doesn't seem right.
Well, I think that's in, there's.
Right, so I'm just
recital
saying,
N.
if you're looking at the top 2 or 3 things.
Oh, I see what you're
that's
saying,
one of the
to
top
prepare it
ones.
down.
That might be one where we
Got
should
it.
address, families have legitimate reasons for opting out, and, is there a way for the state to be kind of figuring out how that doesn't necessarily penalize schools, or, again, if they're not going to be using sanctions in the first year, maybe it's not as big an issue, but.
It is.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is too.
E.
So anyway, I was just, that would be my kind of broader recommendation, is just to streamline it a bit
Yeah.
so that it's a little bit more powerful in terms of the 2 or 3 things we're really trying to get across.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think also just in terms of how we would use this in terms of advocating, I mean, I would definitely have this be an attachment to a short letter that summarizes what our asks are to the state, or our feedback to the state. That could be another approach too, so. And would you agree, though, that adding in the federal piece is important if the feds are truly looking at reducing the role of?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
because that
no,
isn't in
that's
here, and that's
wonderful.
something I would be interested in adding back in,
Yes.
but, okay, so good
No,
feedback
and
about.
I
shortening and
appreciate
streamlining.
all the work you do, and I guess I'm just trying to make sure the
No,
message really
absolutely.
gets across.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Dr. Buell?
I think this would be, I agree with what Bobby has to say about being very specific about short of things. I think we'd be better off leaving off some of our value statements, because I don't find them correct, as a matter of fact. For instance, it says, we also understand that we need a measurement of how our schools and students are learning. I don't have any yes and no, but really we need a measurement of 3 things, and one of which you can't measure, and the other 2, and one of them the SBAC doesn't measure, and the other one it kind of measures. So that whole value, the value statements, we will use scores to inform future instruction, and if our students and schools need additional support. We've already agreed that that isn't happening, or won't happen with the SBAC. They're not going to use it you can't use it for instructional support for students, so we shouldn't say that it should. There's some things like that that I have. I mean, to point them out this week or next week, or send you an email on
Send
it,
me
which
an email
would you
would
like?
be great. So I'm hearing
Okay,
remove some of the
let's
value
talk about-
statements, streamline it down.
All right, then let me see, where I'm red line. Well, we need someone desperately to look into how our school district is interfacing with the Common Core and with SBA tests. We need to look at that, and we need to have somebody, and that should be their job, to see how we did and how we can improve things. It's having this huge impact on our school district. We've got conflicts all over the community on it. We have at least one school, evidently, that has at least 70 kids now opted out of their school alone. We've got tens of kids opting out. We've got angry parents who come to the meeting, and we need to be on top of how this is all working out, and we need to have a system which is a real system, not, oh, the Common Core, so far we pushed the Common Core. Last meeting, or was it the meeting before last night, showed what we were sending home to parents, and it was pretty bad, and it's still out there. I went around to a lot of schools, it's still out there. So I think we need to do that. I did this. I'm not sure this is the way to go, but it was a suggestion. We need to have some plan in place where we have somebody in this district who's going to evaluate and look at what takes place surrounding the Common Core and its assessment, so that we end up at the end of this cycle knowing what we need to change for the next cycle. Now, I don't care how we do that necessarily, except I'd set this up so it's gonna be unbiased, because I was giving the instructions to the people to do it, so I knew it was going to be unbiased.
So when you say this, you're referring
This is
to a suggestion to
yes,
set up a
here's
specific
copies
committee.
of it if you want to pass
So
it
one
down.
thing,
So I'm concerned about that.
okay, thanks.
And the opting out situation is, we should be, in some cases, we have children that we should be asking their parents to opt them out. You got kids who shouldn't be taking this test. That's pretty evident. I mean, that's pretty clear. You've got kids who are way too fragile to be slapped on a computer for 8 hours of failure and frustration. We got kids who can't speak any English, and we're gonna sit them down for 8 hours on a test in English. I mean, we should have some sort of thinking around our children, not just around our system, but around our children, and we should have be thinking about that. I don't know if it has anything to do with this, but it certainly has to do with what we're talking about, the Common Core. Let me
Steve,
just
could I go back
double-check
to
more
your,
things.
you have a thing about creating a whole monitoring system.
Yeah.
What about, instead, since we have our district, our collaborative work group that we have looking at the assessment, there could be some language in here about making sure that they're.
They don't have the time and energy to do what needs to be. We need to have people out visiting school. We need to have at least somebody on full-time doing this. Going out to schools, seeing what's happened, seeing what kids are, seeing how it works, all the way down through the testing system, in my opinion.
Why would that be different from asking our teaching office of teaching and learning to do that?
Because the teaching office and learning is the same people who put out the glowing report of how wonderful the Common Core was. So you're not going to probably get an unbiased. I want to get an
So
unbiased
you're suggesting hiring a
look.
consultant that we should bring in
I'm
somebody
not.
from the
I think they
outside?
should free up. I don't think you need to spend money. I think we could free somebody up to do that.
Okay, so I'll take that in advisement. And if
Okay,
anyone has
and I
any-
got a couple more things here.
Okay, great.
All right. I got to looking because I read.
And if
mine.
anyone else wants to chime in with thoughts or reactions, it's helpful to hear other folks, as suggestions come out, what other folks feel about them. So if not tonight, then I'll follow through on all of this with.
I think by saying that the Oaks was bad and this is good, I think we're making, that's a place we're making a value judgment. The Oaks was only bad if you don't want to get a generalized idea of kind of how your kids are doing in reading. This doesn't give you that. It doesn't give you reading, and it doesn't give you writing. So it doesn't kind of give us anything we really want to do. All we do is spend money and stress everybody out, and then we get nothing for it. we're not even gonna get, I mean, you don't even get, the whole Common Core curriculum that we're trying to say that we're testing is way beyond what you can even teach in a year. So you're only gonna get parts of it anyhow, so just in that alone, the validity of the test is not any good. And that's one of the things we need to look at as we go. What parts fit our educational program? I want to balance the testing. I always talk about people like, you're anti-testing. Well, I might dump the whole thing. But really, I want to balance it out because we're stuck with it. So how is it balanced? We don't know. And,
but I think that's exactly what our group is looking at.
Unless we have somebody out there looking at it in an unbiased way, we're never going to be able to know how to do that.
But I think that's exactly the purpose of that assessment work group that we're working on with the union, to be able to say, what are we doing now? How should it be different? And
but they're not actually doing what I'm talking about. What they've got, they're doing the assessment versus assessment versus assessment. What is this assessing? And what I want to go out and look and say is, should all the kids be taking the test? How are we dealing with it? We're shutting down these labs. Is there other ways to do it? And look at the overall.
I heard that's what they're doing. But
yeah, it's different than what they're talking about.
I don't think it is.
And let me see, I had one
and
thing.
I think, while you're looking, maybe, Demina, do you have something?
Sure. So what I'm concerned about is the results. A couple weeks ago when we had our presentation, I asked if students would get them mailed. Also, because they end on June 5th, that would imply that the students would get them over the summer, which just thinking about it, if 60 to 70% of our students are getting a letter this summer that says they failed, it's not a great way to go back to school. So I was just thinking about what we could do to minimize the effects of the results. I was informed that we had to directly report to each student, but if we could possibly maybe make it a little softer or wait till September when there's a teacher and other support systems to really guide the students and their families through what exactly these tests actually mean. So that's what I'm really concerned about, because these tests are going to happen next week.
So that might be part of what we call on the state too. We've got a list of things we want the state to do, and that maybe we could fold that in there. Okay.
But I was wondering if we, some staff maybe could talk about this, if we had an ability to draft the letter and then actually decide when it went out.
Right. I did. When you brought that up to me, which I think was a great suggestion, it made me think of the PSAT and where you would go in and see what questions you missed, and then you would figure out how to answer them correctly, and then learn from the results actually, which is actually a valuable experience. So thank you. Dr. Bill, you had
just one last comment, I think, and then the rest of it is we talk about the 8.5 hours, but there's all these other things, and that's the other reason that I want to get somebody out there. For instance, this test, in many people suggest this test is culturally biased and racist. So we need somebody out there to look and take that into account. Is it being used in our district in a racist manner? Is it being used in our district in a way that's discriminatory, in a way that's inequitable? Those are questions we need to be asked. We need to ask the questions that people are asking, and also ask the questions of the implementation. It's a combination of the two things. That's why we need somebody out there. That's why the assessment committee, they can't do that. They can't get out. You need to go out to buildings and talk, see what's taking place, and have somebody, that be their job, and tell them, we want an unbiased assessment back here. And that's
yeah, and I'm thinking, again, a recommendation for something like that or other strategies would come from that work group when they take that holistic look.
They may make that kind of a recommendation.
But that's where it should come from, is from them doing the holistic look.
No, it should come
rather
from
than us saying, well, let's also do this while they're doing that other work. That's my perspective.
Should come from us.
So, thank you all very much.
You.
So, appreciate it. I've got my scribblings, and I'll work with staff and everybody, and we'll come back with a revised version next week for your consideration. So, thank you very much for that. Okay, so now we'll wrap up by considering our business agenda. We do have two revised resolutions, which are resolutions 5036 and 5037. Copies of them are in your yellow folders, and they're also on the bookshelf at the back of the auditorium. Are there any additional changes to the business agenda? No. Okay. Do I have a motion and a second to adopt the business agenda? Oh, sure. Yeah, you bet. So 5036 looks like around 5037, there are just two sheets in here, they say revised.
Use different people.
Looks like, yeah.
I think some people are taking off.
Do I have a motion and a second to adopt? Director Knowles moves.
Second.
And Director Vile seconds the adoption of the business agenda. Any public comment?
No.
There's not. Any board discussion? Seeing none. The board will now vote on the business agenda. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes. Yes. Any opposition, any abstentions? No, the business agenda is approved by a vote of 6-0 with Student Representative Jaswal voting.
Yes.
Yes. All right, we're done. We're going to adjourn. The next meeting of this board will be held on Monday, March 9th. We're adjourned. Thanks a lot.